All right, we'll call this meeting to order of the Joint Ag and Water Committee. So it's great to have you all here for this joint meeting here in Pinedale. Welcome, Select Water. And with that, we will take roll call.
Madam Chairman, this is roll call for September 12th, 2023 for Joint Ag and Select Water Joint Meeting. Senator French.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator Kolb.
Present.
Senator Larson.
Here.
Representative Allemand.
Present.
Representative Allred.
Here.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Conrad.
Here.
Representative Davis. Representative Slagle.
Present.
Representative Eklund.
Excused.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Co-Chairman Steinmetz.
Here.
Co-Chairman Crago.
Here.
We have a quorum for the Ag Committee. And for Select Water, Senator Ellis.
Excused.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Katie, he was supposed to be online and I'm not seeing the online
is.
connection up. So
He
Are
is
we
online
having-
and he just indicated
right.
here, so.
are we having a technical difficulty? Let's check that because I was informed yesterday we were on and offline quite a bit and people were having trouble viewing our meeting.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
all right. Senator Guru, thank you.
Senator Hicks,
Present.
Senator Kolb,
Present.
Senator Larson,
Here.
Representative Conrad,
Here.
Representative Larson, Representative Nyman,
Here.
Representative Summers,
Here.
Representative Yin,
Here.
Chairman Steinmetz,
Here.
Representative Crago,
Here.
and a quorum for Select Water.
All right. Thank you, Katie. And with that, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Senator French, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, with that, we have a little housekeeping to take care of. I'd ask Josh to come forward and explain on Select Water. We do elections for our leadership rather than appointments by the Speaker and President of the Senate. And we have a vacancy due to John Eklund stepping down from this committee. Representative Crago has taken his place on the Select Water Committee. That appointment has been made by Speaker Summers. However, we'll let Josh tell us how we need to proceed from here. Thank you. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, Josh Anderson, LSO. So yeah, as you noted, the statute, it's 2811-101 B1 says that the Select Committee shall elect from its members a chairman and vice chairman. And as you noted previously, Senator Steinmetz had been appointed as chairman and Representative Eklund was appointed or elected, excuse me, as vice chairman. And now, of course, Representative Eklund has resigned. And so there is a vacancy on the committee in that position. So.
Thank you, Josh, for explaining that to us. We appreciate that. Are there any questions for Josh? Okay, seeing none. We will go ahead and proceed with an election now for vice chairman at this time. I would really appreciate that position being filled so that we can get the work of the committee done in a timely manner and I can coordinate with our vice chairman. And so with that, I would entertain an motion for vice chairman. Representative Nyman.
I'd like Representative Albert Summers.
We have a nomination for Albert Summers from Representative Nyman.
I will second it.
Seconded by Representative Allemand. Are there any Are there any further nominations from the floor? Further nominations from the floor? Further nominations, seeing none. I would move that we will cast a vote for unanimously for Representative Summers to be vice chairman. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, welcome Speaker Summers as vice chairman of Select Water. I look forward to working with you. And if my voice doesn't hold out today, we may put you in charge. All right, Representative Alman.
Thank you. And this is just a comment. Can we have a prayer for John Eklund?
Absolutely. Would you like to lead us in that prayer? Representative Alman, would you like to lead us in that prayer since you suggested it?
Well, you're more efficient at it than I am. I would rather you did.
Representative Conrad has volunteered. Would we all please stand and please turn on your microphone so everyone can hear you?
Our beloved Father in heaven, we're extremely grateful for this opportunity to meet together today as colleagues and members of this great state. At this time, Father, we pray for the health, safety, and well-being of our dear friend, colleague, and peer, John Eklund. He is greatly missed. We pray that during this difficult time in his life, that he understands the prayers that are with him, the love that we have for him, and that he may be blessed with those issues, or more importantly, those solutions and blessings that he stands in need of at this time. We wish him a speedy recovery, but most importantly, we wish him to understand that we love him and that we pray for his family as well during this challenging time. And we look forward to seeing him again soon. And we ask for these blessings to be with our Vice Chairman Eklund in the name of my beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And with that, our wishes do go out to John and his family, and he is very optimistic and in good spirits. And we look forward to working with him through the duration of his term. With that, we will have Jackie from CSG West come up and tell us a little bit about our itinerary for this evening and the next couple of days. If you have signed up to participate in the CSG West opportunities that are before us. So Jackie, welcome. Please tell us who you are and who you're with.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a delight to be with you this morning. As you may be aware, CSG West is a bipartisan organization serving the western states of the United States. We are here in Pinedale starting tonight and going through Thursday, hosting the Colorado River Forum under the leadership of Assemblymember Howard Watts of the Lower Basin and your very own Senator Larry Hicks for the Upper Basin. We have a number of activities and events happening. If you have not done so and wish to attend those, please do register. I'm happy to give you some information about that, but I also know the LSA has all the information you may need to help you make that happen. We are delighted that many of you are joining us tonight for the welcome reception and dinner, preceded by a short tour of the Fremont Dam. Some questions have come up. We do have an agenda. It's posted online. Tonight, we ask if you wish to go to the Fremont Dam tour, please arrive at the Lakeside Lodge by 5 p.m. For those of you staying at the Hampton Inn, if you wish to have a ride, I'm available to ferry some of you up, and I'm happy to do so. Just reach out to me and let me know. So at 5:15 from the Lakeside Lodge, we will drive a short distance to the Fremont Dam, where we will have some remarks from Speaker Summers, who will then turn it over to Abe and Spencer, who will talk about the water source of Fremont Lake, the infrastructure, how it serves the communities, and answer any questions you may have. Following the tour, we'll return to the Lakeside Lodge, and at 6 p.m. we'll enjoy some drinks and some appetizers, followed by a dinner. We will have remarks. We will have Ann McKinnon joining us, and we will have several folks, several of our speakers who will be providing information on Thursday and Friday in attendance as well. An opportunity for you to meet and greet your colleagues from around the basin. We are fortunate to have Arizona and Utah and Colorado and really all of the states represented at this year's forum. So we look forward to that. But if, as all good party planning, if we don't know you're coming, it's really hard to make sure there's a place for you at the table or a seat in the shuttle for our Fontanelle Dam tour that kicks off tomorrow. So please do register. And if you have any questions or difficulties, we're always here to assist you. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Eddie, are there any questions for Jackie? Any questions?
Madam Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator
just
Hicks.
wondering, and maybe for staff, if we have that registration link, could you email that again? I think you've done it once to everybody here. And so those members of both committees that are interested in either the reception and tour tonight or the tour tomorrow, please go ahead and get that registered and get that done sometime before noon today.
All right, seeing no questions for you. Thank you so much for setting all of this up. And we know we're a little bit like herding chickens sometimes. So thank you for putting up with our lack of registration. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right.
And I just want to thank the LSA for all of their support and coordination on this activity. And of course, Speaker Summers, Senator Hicks, and Representative Yin for their support of this event. We are just delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, with that, we'll get into our first topic. We have an agency update from the Wyoming State Forestry and Kelly Norris. And so we'll go ahead with that. And before we get started, I think Representative Craigo had a few remarks.
Madam Chairman, I just wanted to congratulate Ms. Norris on her appointment to be our Wyoming State Forester. We miss her dearly in Buffalo. I can tell you that she's a great community member, and Cheyenne's lucky to have her down there. So congratulations.
Congratulations and welcome. And I think Representative Craigo speaks for the entire joint committee, both of us, and we're glad to have you with us today. So go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, for the invitation to present on behalf of State Forestry Division. My name is Kelly Norris, and I'm the new Wyoming State Forester. I'd like to start my presentation with a brief background about State Forestry, who we are and what we do. Wyoming State Forestry is part of the Office of State Lands and Investments, so we're a division under them. The state forester is appointed by the State Land Board of Commissioners and is mandated to have direction of all forest interests and all matters pertaining to forestry within the jurisdiction of Wyoming. State Forestry has three missions: conserving working forests by promoting sound forest management, protecting forest resources and other values against wildfire and forest health threats, and enhancing the benefits through improved management of Wyoming's varied resources in our communities, our riparian areas, as well as in our mountain ranges. We conserve, we protect, and we enhance Wyoming's forests. From that mission, we implement three program areas. That's our state trust land management, our fire management, and our assistance forestry. Currently, State Forestry has 47 full-time employees, 4 seasonals, and those seasonals are a part of our HeliTAC program, and 6 AWAC positions. And those 6 AWAC positions are mainly associated with our Good Neighbor Authority program. State Forestry is organized by 5 districts. Each district has a district forester and at least 1 assistant district forester. With the opening of a new field office in Cody this August, we have 8 field offices across Wyoming. So we have one here in Pinedale, We have one down in Lyman, and that's our District 4. We have Cody, Riverton for District 3. And then we also have Casper and Laramie for District 2. We have an office in Newcastle and an office in Buffalo. Our fire program helps support and coordinate fire suppression by providing training. We have an aviation program. So we have our Helitack program and our SEATs, which is our single engine air tankers. And we also finance wildfires as well as a fleet program. So in Cheyenne, we have a shop that coordinates with our county cooperators on ordering and building fire packages using federal access equipment for fire suppression. Currently, our helicopter program is located in Duncan Ranch, which is just outside of Glen Rock. Our forestry assistant program has our program managers who manage statewide programs, and those include rural forestry, which is our private forested landowner outreach, community forestry, our forest health, fuels mitigation, which is typically our wild and urban interface, and then GIS inventory. So these programs, we utilize federal funding that typically come in to us through the Federal Forest Service, and we pass them through to implement important programs across the state of Wyoming. And lastly, we have the conservation program that is located in Newcastle, Wyoming, at the Department of Corrections. So this program utilizes the inmates to assist with wildland fire response, conduct forestry related work, as well as community service projects. Looking at that photo there, we have state forestry staff that was from the end of April of this year. And what you see is foresters, the ones wearing flannel. We have mechanics, conservation crew supervisors, we have G&A foresters and fire staff all together. What I do want to point out is from that moment to now, 7 of those people are no longer with State Forestry. State Forestry has gone through some very large transitions in the last couple of years, specifically with the retirement of Bill Crapser at the end of last year, and the entire leadership team has turned over. With that, we've had some pretty large transitions in the state agency. People have been moving up and moving out. So we've had transitions in our field, our fire staff, our program management, and actually this summer we were sitting with 25% vacancies. We have made impressive progress filling these open positions. We're focusing on being intentional with the onboarding of new employees, providing support to our new leaders who have stepped up into these new leadership roles, and really staying focused on implementing our mission. I'm going to transition now from who we are, what we do, what we've been dealing with in the last year with our transitions, onto what we've been accomplishing. So we're going to go into state trust land management, and state trust land management includes timber sales and thinning projects. And those are to improve the forest health and the longevity of the future income from commercial timber that are being grown on these lands. All revenue that is coming from timber sales off of these state trust lands goes directly to the state trust. State forestry manages approximately 250,000 acres of forested trust lands. And about 170,000 of acres of that is what we would consider forest land that's available for harvesting. In fiscal year 2023, State Forestry sold just under 1 million board feet. Our sustainable harvest goal for us is about 4.3 million board feet. But just so you're aware, in fiscal year 2022, we sold over 8 million board feet. So we've kind of evened it out here. We had some transitions and we had a real push to get as much wood out as available to keep certain mills going. One of the other things I want to note is we did have a mill closure in Livingston, Montana, and that did have an impact on our northern forests in Wyoming. That mill is planned to reopen this next month with a new owner, and that will make a real difference in helping move timber in our northern Wyoming forests. State Forestry also conducts thinning on these state trust lands for the purposes of forest health management and improving upon future investment in timber harvesting. And this past year, we contracted over 1,000 acres on state trust lands. Next, we'll provide a fire update. We've had below average fire season. Most of the fires have been started from natural lightning causes. Today is the last day of our SEAT contract. And so we chose not to extend it beyond the September 12th due to the future weather prediction and really the fuels conditions right now. Our Helitack program is going to continue for the next month till about mid-October. As of this year, all 23 counties are now participating in the emergency fire suppression account. Sweetwater County did join this year. We are very excited about that. We've had 2 EFSA fires approved this year. One was a complex in Goshen County and the other was in Washakie County. And that picture up there is our SEAT And I believe that's the Devil's Slide fire that was taken up in Washakie County from this summer. And you can see it's pretty green grass still. Our seats are located in Casper Airport and they're supported by Wyoming BLM. So the seat and tanker base that's getting built at the Casper Airport are actually going to hold our seats there and help manage and run out of it. It's a very interagency program. So just want to give you kind of a background on that program. And lastly, just a reminder to everyone, fire season is not over at all. Most of our largest fires occur in September and October. And so we're not out of the woods until we get some more snow, but fire season's not over yet. Okay. And I want to give a quick update on our assistance program. A few highlights I wanted to share with the committee. State forestries. So when it comes to private forested lands in Wyoming, the second largest forested landowner in Wyoming are private lands. And so we take private forest land assistance pretty seriously through the division. And we've increased our forest management plans. And in fiscal year 2023, we completed 21. And that pushed us over 16% of our private forest lands are currently managed by forest management plans. Our state forestry's Wyoming landowner of the year was Mark and Nancy Nichols from Foxborough, Wyoming. In 2018, the Nichols received a forest stewardship plan and completed fuels reduction projects throughout their forested acres. In 2020, the Mullen Fire burned their entire property, but the managed lands that had occurred helped save their structures and almost all of their forests. The Nichols story was featured in the Barnyards and Backyards 2021 summer edition. State Forestry has one other highlight that I think is a true success, and that's how well we've been competing with our fuels mitigation grants. We received over $1 million of hazardous fuels grants and one community wildfire defense grant for over $234,000. Right now, we're working with numerous counties across Wyoming on the next round of CWDG grant applications. We're expecting at least 8. Many of these are to update community wildfire protection plans. And many of those plans are eligible, and this funding would help get those pushed through. Okay. Moving on to our Good Neighbor Authority update. The Good Neighbor Authority is authorized by the 2018 Farm Bill and allows state agencies to implement important project work on federal lands. Currently, State Forestry has 19 active U.S. Forest Service agreements and 3 Wyoming BLM agreements. We have one full-time program manager who helps manage and coordinate all of these agreements, along with the projects being implemented in each of these agreements. We have 4 full-time G&A foresters. One is located for the Black Hills National Forest in our Newcastle office. The other one is here in Pinedale for the Bridger-Teton National Forest. We have one on the Medicine Bow Route National Forest at Laramie. And then we have one shared position between the Medicine Bow Route National Forest, Wyoming BLM, and State Forestry. We also have one seasonal forester for the Bighorn National Forest. Since the inception of the program, State Forestry has contracted over 9,000 acres of management on federal lands using our state contracting system. We currently have 19 active G&A timber sales across the state and 5 G&A service contracts being administered. We expect this program to continue to grow. We are carrying the largest workload portfolio that we've ever carried for contracting in the state in our forestry history, and we expect it not to stop. And we're hoping that it continues to build the capacity for our federal partners. Okay, I'm going to give a brief update on the forest plan revisions as we have U.S. Forest Service Deputy Regional Foresters from Region 2 and Region 4 here to present specifically on this topic. Wyoming is expected to have 3 forest plan revisions kicking off this year. The Black Hills National Forest Plan revision started with initial assessments, which were reviewed and comments were given by our agency and numerous other state agencies and counties. The final assessments are expected to be released in the very near future. State Forestry has been coordinating with the governor's office and continues to be engaged with the counties and the Forest Service as we prepare to move further into this planning process. In order to obtain the most accurate forest inventory available, the Black Hills National Forest is conducting a forest-wide LiDAR project. State Forestry was asked to help with the collecting of plot data needed to help validate and integrate into this LiDAR data. Our forestry crew supervisors, our Black Hills G&A Forester, and our Newcastle Foresters have been actively collecting data and have already completed 80 data plots. We've agreed to complete about half of Wyoming's plots, which is 120 plots, and we're sharing, well, Wyoming's plots total is 340, and we agreed with Bear Lodge Ranger District to split it. So we have 120, and all of these are to be done by the end of this year. The Bridger Teton is expected to kick off their forest plan this fall. I look forward to Deputy Regional Forester Chris Campbell's report on how close the forest is to releasing their assessments. And the Medicine Bow Route National Forest is also planning to start their forest plan revision this fall. And I look forward to Deputy Regional Forester Jackie Buchanan's presentation on this. So State Forestry, we're committed to investing our staff's time to engage and participate in these forest plan revisions. This is incredibly important. It's going to be a long process, and we recognize that, but we need to be at that table, and we're working pretty closely with our counties and in the governor's office and our other state agencies on this process. Okay. Lastly, I want to share with the committee about a new study that was released earlier this spring from the Nature Conservancy of Wyoming. We all know Wyoming's forests provide a great deal of benefits to our state and to the West. Many of these benefits provide services that do not have monetary value associated with them. The Nature Conservancy set out to understand what the monetary value would be beyond the benefits of a traditional commercial timber sale or grazing. The study found that Wyoming's forests provide $26 billion in benefits every year. As the committee is aware, Wyoming is considered a headwater state, as 4 major river streams begin in Wyoming and provide clean water to many communities further downstream. The study found that the overall value for all water-related services provided by forests in Wyoming is approximately $2 billion a year. What does that mean for Wyoming's forests? It means they're worth investing in and properly managing. For State Forestry, we learned a lot from the study and view it as a first step in a longer process we are working towards. State Forestry has started to identify priority areas in the state to truly help enable needed cross-boundary landscape level management with our federal, our state, and our county partners. And with that, I'm going to end my presentation and open it up for any questions that the chairman or other committee members may have.
Thank you, Kelly. Are there any Representative Nyman? He's right off the bat.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Norris, just a curiosity question for my own edification. Does the State Forestry Department work with private landowners to do controlled burning on any of their private lands to be able to mitigate some of the problems? And we see I live at Hewlett, and we always are watching the federal government do their controlled burns around Devil's Tower. And I'm just curious, do you guys have any kind of programs where you work with landowners to in certain times of year when things are conducive to that type of, ground control of shrubs and brush? Because we can have you come in and State Forestry will work with us to be paid so many dollars per acre to go and get rid of junipers and all this undergrowth that creates a lot of problems with the fire that gets into the canopy. But I guess I'm curious as to, do you or would you consider any kind of a program to do controlled burning to help reduce the amount of undergrowth, increase grass, improve our forests through a management practice that is less costly and can be managed over time and can probably improve the habitat and improve our grazing situation?
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Representative, we are looking into that. We have an FMO, a fire management officer, who actually has those credentials to put us into those type of areas where we're looking at prescribed fire. Currently, we do not have the true capacity, but we are stepping into that. Our staff typically help with our federal partners on multiple prescribed fires, specifically in your area with our conservation crew too. We're going to continue to look at that and grow that. That is something we do have a desire to continue to look to, in specific with private forested lands. We have been assisting the NRCS. We've created a one-page burn permit for them to provide when they do cost share on thinning and piles, and then they pile and pile burn, to give the private landowner some assistance into that. And we do help with our private forested landowners, providing them the information they need to notify, call, and all of those type of associated needs when it comes to pile burning. When it comes to prescribed fire, we're a little ways away from that yet in that capacity, but thank you.
Follow? Go ahead.
Chairman, on another note, on your seats, are you in a capacity when you're using them? Because we've had several fires here years past. And the seats were critical. Basically, the seats in your forestry department saved Pine Haven, Wyoming. It was an incredible venture and Bill Craftsburg did an incredible job. And so you have big shoes to fill. But as far as the folks in my part of the country, but I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job. I guess my question is, and some of the questions that were relayed to me is, the seats were having to fly all the way back to Rapid City, South Dakota to reload or back down to Casper. Is there any ability to be able to get, like with Hewlett having an airport readily available right there within minutes of that particular fire? Is there any ability to have some of the different airports and strategic areas around the state during fire season, when we see fire dangers that are high risk, prepared to be able to handle the reload seats in a quicker fashion? Or are you restricted to some very specific areas that can only handle those seats and their ability to reload with retardant?
Madam Chairman, Representative, that is a great question. It comes to two things. The limiting factor is the fact that we need a mix maxer, we need a seat-based manager. We have stood up temporarily multiple summers in Gillette, and we have utilized the Gillette Airport. Campbell County has provided seasonal support. We've also brought in folks, and we've actually started to create the mix master for county volunteers to get certified in. It is something that we are looking at specifically in that Campbell County area due to the amount of fires that are occurring in that northern area of the state. As that lightning band comes through, we've looked at other areas as well, but it's something we definitely can continue to look to improve. The SEED program is pretty new as well. And so as we continue to utilize it and we see a future with it, I completely believe that we'll start looking into other areas where we can support the seats beyond just Casper or Rapid City.
Representative Almond is next, and then we'll go to Representative Conrad.
Ms. Norris, thank you very much for being here. And this question may seem a little argumentative, but it's not. I'm just kind of wondering, the study found that Wyoming's forests provide $26 billion every year in benefits. What are those benefits? And I don't mean to be at all argumentative. I'm just wondering what those benefits are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative, and I can pass on the actual full study, but the study looked at 15 different benefits from social, economic, recreation. It looked at wildlife habitat. It looked at water improvements for healthy forests. It looked at recreation values. It looked at all of the things that we can't typically put a monetary value on. And so that's what that study actually looked at. And they tried to create what that would be in that put a dollar to that benefit. So those are things that we typically don't, like commercial timber is pretty easy to monetize because we know what that monetary value is. These are all the services that forests provide that we don't typically have a monetized value. We don't have a dollar value associated with them.
Ed.
Once again, I don't want to be argumentative. I just want to understand. But these benefits are not physical benefits. They're benefits that's out there in the air. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chairman. Some are in the air, some are on the ground. Some are associated with multiple social benefits that we have. And that's why it's so hard conceptually. Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Madam Chair, thank you. First and foremost, congratulations, Ms.
Thank
Norris,
you.
on your appointment. My question resolves a systemic issue throughout the United States, specifically Wyoming, in terms of vacancy and employment. My question is there a relationship that you have now with the Department of Corrections in the Newcastle office that recruits some of those folks who have successfully completed their sentencing, for lack of a better word, to pull them into the Wyoming State Forestry Division? And the second part of the question is, what is the largest hurdle or challenge now with recruitment? Thank you.
Ed.
Thank you, Chairman Simons. Thank you, Representative. First, with the Wyoming Department of Corrections. With the inmates, we train them so when they when they come out of state forestry on the fire side, they are fully certified. They have been trained in NWCG, and they are willing to go out and fight fire. Typically, that cohort sometimes moves on to other living situations, and we've been looking into that specifically. How do we connect? We'd have to actually build seasonals and have the ability to have seasonal work. And so that is something we have been talking to VOA about in particular, trying to track where do these inmates, when they come out, go, and what if they are still interested in doing the wildland firefighting side of things. We're going to continue to look at that. That is something that we think is an opportunity as well. When it comes to the vacancy rate with Wyoming, a couple things are occurring in the forestry world. One is there's been quite a bit of funding that's been coming down through the infrastructure bill, the IIJA. And what we're seeing is a lot of money being spent and invested into NGOs, into the Forest Service. And we're having to compete all of a sudden with all of these other partners. And some of that has caused us to also compete with our federal partners, where you're seeing opportunities for growth, fire retirement, things like that we at our level don't get to compete with in the same fashion. So it is something that we've also been really focused on building our internal, our entry level, and getting them prepared to take up and move up into our higher level programs as well. And so that is something we have to, it's easier for us to bring them in at a G&A level, and then have them come up and become an assistant district forester, or have them come in and then become a program manager. So we are trying to find how do we lengthen our structure so we have growth and room for growth as well. You're welcome.
Is that all right? And I'm going to go next to Senator Guru, who has been patiently waiting with his hand up online.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Forester Norris, good morning. And I too add my congratulations. Question about your, and I know they're in the room, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but that's why you got the gig probably. Talk to me about how would you characterize your relationship with our federal partners, specifically within regards to, they're starting their forest plan. Do you feel you have that seat at the table that you talked about? What do you think could be impediments to that? What do you think are the greatest opportunities? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Great question. I think our relationship has room to grow and improve, and we're going to continue to do that. We have reinvigorated the shared stewardship program, and we've met with our federal partners, and we're starting to look at how we can actually use our shared stewardship agreement and start working towards where are our priorities in the state, where are our cross-boundary opportunities, and creating a larger voice for Wyoming when it comes to our forests. When it comes to the forest plan revisions, it is something we are watching pretty closely, making sure we are at the table. For example, just tomorrow, I'm sitting in on a cooperators meeting with the counties and the Forest Service on the Black Hills National Forest. What we do want to see, and what the region has heard loud and clear, is even though we have forest plan revisions in Region 2 and Region 4, we'd like them as standardized as possible so that we can manage it. And with the rollout that they are organized and communicative, the Forest Service is starting to prepare, and Jackie and Chris will cover more of what they are trying to do to help build that capacity. My concern is while we're all focused on the forest plan for the next 5 to 10 years, the forest continues to be doing work on the ground. And that is something in my background I'm very concerned about and want to see continued. And that's where we look to how do we continue to keep the capacity and the management going forward as we focus on the forest plan revisions. I do believe we have a seat at the table. I do believe we need to be organized to have that seat at the table. I do think the counties are taking this seriously, and I do appreciate that greatly, as well as many of our other state agencies. And the more we can invest our time in being organized on the back end with our counties and our state agencies, the louder and more clear our voice is going to be on the impact to the forests.
Follow up, Madam Chairman.
Guru, do you have a follow-up? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Forester Norris, for that. You mentioned, and I couldn't agree with you more about, while this plan is proceeding, the work on the ground day to day right now. And I'm glad to hear that you're trying to keep that working. Give me an example of what you think we should be doing to facilitate that. Is there something that whether it's a legislature can do to help, or if it's from a funding standpoint, boots on the ground type of thing? Where can we help you? Or maybe it's just what can you do, Marshall, to get the folks at the federal level to continue that? Because I do agree with you. Sometimes we get in these planning processes and we get into this paralysis about doing anything until the process is done. We've got work to do. There are things that can be done. Could you just talk a little more about that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can. One of the things we're specifically looking at in supporting building capacity is through our Good Neighbor Authority program, in particular, where we are now looking, in particular with the BT, for an example, the Bridger Teton. We just did a modification to our special agreement with the Bridger Teton. They moved quite a bit of money into that account just for us to contract out NEPA assessments. We're looking at wanting to continue to do that in other areas across Region 2 as well, to help use that support and move NEPA and get it going and keep it going. One of the other things I've impressed upon our forestry staff is being at the table when it comes to NEPA. And we have a seat at the table, and in some forests, we do a very good job where we're there during the planning process, having the input that needs to be done before it even gets out to scoping. And we need to continue to do that. And so it's investing that time. So that is one thing we are seeing is a change in our investment, but also looking at how we can use Good Neighbor Authority to continue to funnel more money and get more assessments done so we can get the NEPA done, so we can get the projects done. Sometimes it's trying to get over that huge barrier of NEPA.
Did that get you, Senator Guru? All right, we had Senator Kolb was next, and then we'll go this way next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, into the out of the frying pan into the fire, as they say. So congratulations. I've got some concerns, or really deep concerns about quote unquote what the words we've used in the past, and it was about a seat at the table with the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, from the Rock Springs RMP and what they proposed, our seat at the table is counting for nothing. They don't listen to us. I know people had comments that weren't taken into consideration in the final recommendation that they've had. And I think Senator Guru did a great job of kind of, going down this road. But to further this conversation, I don't want to hear any platitudes and whatever we're trying to do and hasn't worked. And so what do you think that we can do to effectively improve this? I mean, I realize, you're forced with a lot of pushing and pulling here about going different directions, but I feel like the seat at the table doesn't mean anything anymore. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about improving the seat at the table, or what you may think, or your thoughts on that. And I have a second question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. That's a great point, and that's good feedback to hear. Thank you, Senator. I think one of the things we're really looking at when we're specifically, since the Black Hills has already started moving down this road, is strategically thinking about what is it we want and what is it we're going to go for, and where are we thinking we need to what battles we're going to pick. The more we can be strategic and the cleaner we are in what we want is going to be beneficial as we move through this process. We are going to need to invest a lot of time, because if we choose, I hear what is being said, they're not listening, but if we're not there at all, then we have no voice. So that's not a good choice either. And so we have to be there. We have to have our seat, and we have to also strategize and be very clear on what we need and what we want going into those forest plans, and to make a major difference moving forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And another, I guess, a separate question is your association with the Nature Conservatory of Wyoming. Now, from what I understand of this, and this is why I'm asking this question, they seem to be an anti-motorized group. They're opposed to, I was looking at the pie chart and trying to figure out, well, maybe there's something in there about recreation, and there isn't. So I'm very concerned that we are going down a road that excludes a huge part of the reality of this world, and this is my opinion, about using and enjoying our forests through multiple means, multiple use. And this group seems not be in that camp of multiple use. They seem to be excluding motorized travel. That's an easy one to pick, snowmobiles or side-by-sides, whatever it may be. So could you elaborate on how you interact with this group and why you're collaborating with this group and how that is not adversarial to motorized travel? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator. We have Wyoming, the Nature Conservancy of Wyoming, their direct forester, Kari Kierstead, was interested in trying to figure out a way to find a way to get investment and funding towards forest management, and to learn what is the value of our forests, so that one day we can come and say, we need to invest in this because these forests we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose this investment and manage this investment. So it came directly from the thought process of focusing on what are our forests worth and how can we find a way to better invest and manage them. And it wasn't specific on anything to do with multiple use. It was very specific on the health of the forest and the management of them to keep them healthy. In regards to travel management, I have not discussed any travel management whatsoever with the Nature Conservancy.
Go ahead.
I know these are tough questions. I mean, but you're obviously up to it. Do you have a value? Do you place a positive value on multiple use of our forested lands vis-a-vis ATVs, snowmobiles, whatever it may be? Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Speaker Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And to kind of pile on a little bit, this would be an ask, as somebody that has a grazing permit on the Bridger Teton, and having seen what did happen with the Rock Springs RMP, I am incredibly worried about what the Bridger Teton Forest is going to do in their planning process. And so my ask to you is, and it's really maybe to the governor's office, but you're the rep here, let's put it that way, is I need to understand what your strategy is on paper, and how, oftentimes we get after the federal government for not reaching out to the different entities that do business on the forest or wherever. In other words, outreach to stakeholders. The state does a worse job than the federal government of reaching out to stakeholders, in my opinion. And so how are you going to interface with grazing permittees like me? How are you going to interface with the, and it's not just the job of the counties to do this. And so I really want to understand and see on paper what the state strategy is going into these planning processes, and how you're going to engage the stakeholders of Wyoming that are utilizing these forests.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I cannot speak on behalf of the governor's office, but I can follow up and provide you that information based on your request. You're welcome.
Madam Chair, just a quick question on the numbers you guys are showing here. Showed, and I presume that was, let's see, 2022, you generated almost $290,000 in revenue out of 800 board feet of timber sold. And in 2018, it was almost a third of that. Could you kind of explain a little bit why the numbers are so, so far apart from only 4 years ago? And how does that look going forward? Is it on a downward trend? And what was it before that? If you could give us a little color on sort of the commercial economics of what's going on here. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator. So when we count a timber sale that's sold, that means it's just been awarded under contract. The revenue side of that is actually when that timber is cut and hauled off the forest. So what you're seeing there is when we have an increase in revenue, that means it's a healthy that means that timber is actually getting logged and hauled to industry across the state. And so it's typically, as we sell timber, some of those timber sales can sit for a couple of years, depending on who purchases that and why they want to hold on to that timber for whatever purpose. Some of that is getting moved quickly. And so what we're watching on that revenue is, as it's increasing, that means we have an active forest management occurring on our state trust lands. That is a very good thing to see. And we're wanting to continue to see that moving into the future.
Are you follow up? Go ahead.
Quick follow-up. Do you see with our so-called federal partners, is that infringing on the growth ability, or what's the trend look like? Can you elaborate a little bit on whether it looks promising or if it's going in the other direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator. It depends on the forest, on that number, and if they're meeting their target goals. Some forests are able to meet their targets better than others. Some forests, for example, when we do G&A, we really help supplement their accomplishments. The bighorns, we were 16% G&A contracts of that volume in a fiscal year for them. So it's very dependent. It's really important for us to continue to do G&A to help build that capacity where the Forest Service is maybe not meeting their timber targets.
Senator Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Norris, just some curiosity questions in my part of the country up there. How many forest sales have been given out to producers or timber processors that are still on the books? And how long can they hold a lease before they get them? And I'll give a little bit of background on this. I've had some folks come to me and say that we've recut the same state land 3 or 4 times, while there's other areas there that have never been touched that have been still, because they're a little less accessible. They're maybe not as easy to get to. And then there was some discussion that now the state's not releasing as much timber and we're having a hard time finding logs, and we've cut and cut and cut. And what is the situation? What is the system? How long does a processor have to finish that sale? And then will it ultimately come up for rebid, or are they still holding on to contracts that were let when timber was a buck a ton or $2 a ton or whatever? I mean, I'd love to sell timber right now for $10 a ton, and I can't get that. And I'm close to the mills. So my curiosity is, how is the state doing their permitting, and how long do these guys and gals have to be able to finish these sales? And will they ever lose that opportunity and reopen them for rebidding at a higher value? Because are they hanging on to some extremely cheap timber we're going to be paid for very little based on the current values in the markets? Or do they get to keep those for an extended period of time and then utilize those very, let's say, overly maybe reasonable sales cheaper than what I can sell them timber for, even closer to the mill? So just curiously on, what is your system, and how long do they have, and what are your requirements?
Did you get all that?
I think so. Thank
All
you,
right,
Chairman.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Representative. I can only speak to state trust lands. So when it comes to the Forest Service or the BLM, I'm really not sure. I'm okay, just state trust. You brought up a very important word, and it's accessibility. And that also has a little bit to do on when you see state timber sales sell, as well as where we're seeing at times more revenue. It's our state trust lands across the state. For example, when I was district forester in District 5, 75% of the state trust lands were only accessible through private lands. And you had to have that private landowner give you that access. And that private landowner also wanted to have a say on who was going to be cutting on those lands. And so to provide access through their lands, they had to give permission. Because we do not have the easement. So it is up to the contractor to gain the access to those state trust lands. And so that is where you see us try to move to opportunity. And we try and see, that's why cross-boundary projects are so important. When we have cross-boundary work, we bring in and we open up more timber and we can sell it. So when it comes to how long a contract, we put it out to bid, and it's based on an appraisal system. And almost all of our timber sales are put out, the majority of them when they're at a certain valued amount that we believe that they're valued in timber and the volume, they get put out to a bid process. They'll be awarded that contract. Typically, they're 2-year contracts, 3-year at most. If there is a weather issue or some sort of issue that occurs, we do allow an extension of some sort. In your question in regards to the value changing, we have that right to reappraise those sales at any time when we're looking specifically at those extensions and reappraise them again to the correct value. Absolutely correct. Specifically for that state trust, yes. Mhm.
All right. Okay, committee, any further questions? Any further questions for Kelly? Well, she's done a great job of answering. I know you're in a tough position and we appreciate you doing the job for us.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any closing comments?
No, just thank you. Thank you for all your questions too.
All right, we'll be in touch, I'm sure. With that, we are on schedule. And up next is Senator Hicks and his information on water yield. We'll let him get kind of set up for a minute and pause until he's ready.
Madam Chairman, do you want to take public comment on that last piece?
Thank you for the reminder. Do we have any public comment on the state forestry update? Come on up. Thank you for the reminder, Josh. Welcome.
Ken Conley, Lincoln County Commissioner, but I'm also Vice Chairman of the Coalition of Local Governments. I'll try to address a couple quick questions. Speaker, please.
I don't think your microphone is on.
You'd know how to do that.
Go ahead,
I do
start
that.
over
So,
again, please.
Lincoln County Commissioner Kent Connolly, also the Vice Chairman of the Coalition of Local Governments, the entire southwestern Wyoming, dealing with both regions and 5 forests totally. And so when we take these issues on, we deal with them at a high level. Number one, we formed the Coalition of Local Governments 35 years ago, long before I was around, for the specific purpose of getting the federal agencies to play with us in a myriad of different things. That CLG is funded by us as counties and by the FNRPA funding that we look to you for. So I will put a pitch in for FNRPA for that reason. Federal National Resource Policy account, part of the governor's budget, spread across the state in about 7 or 8 locations. It's functioning a lot better right now than it did in the past. The foresters help. We are tied directly with the forest and the state to doing a job of trying to fill in what they can't get for people. Those accounts help us hire those GNA foresters and do it. Without those positions in there, this county right here is using one right here. That's the Bridger Teton one. And we are trying to, we also have forest collaboratives that tie into these things. We are operating at an extremely high level of trying to stay at the table with this process that's going on. Our concern with that BLM latest decision is huge. And we absolutely need a governor's review that comes from the governor. When that comes down, he's already put his position out there, and I will thank him right here at this mic for how quickly he responded. But his consistency reviews that you can speak to him about, you need to speak to him, because when the final product of all this stuff comes out, he does the consistency review. Like to say, the FNRPA hunt money helps us. The other part of this puzzle is, as this comes to the table in all these discussions, is the protesting. We're protesting the Ashley National Forest right now because it dips into Wyoming for the amount of timber that they put into it. We are saying they are 40 to 50% under projecting in their plans. We participated heavily in that plan for a couple reasons. The one main reason is to get consistency. We wanted that Ashley plan to be the model for the BT and the Medbo and the others that we tie into. And so those are just thoughts I had that you would know about that. Some of the sales, Mr. Nyman, representative, excuse me, they will go 3 to 5 years sometimes. I can give you 2 on the Bridger Teton right now that are 4 years old. Okay. And lack of loggers, lack of economy, as you stated, are directly tied to those reasonings. And we're putting a lot of pressure on that. CLG group is trying to organize the loggers. So those are efforts we're going to do. Madam Chairman, I would take questions on the structure of those or anything you would like to ask.
Okay, committee, do we have any questions? Questions? You're getting off easy today. Thank you so much for your service.
you.
We appreciate it. All right, is there any further public comment? Is there any public comment online? No public comment online. With that, public comment on this section is closed, and we'll go to Senator Hicks for his presentation.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, we're trying to get a microphone hooked up here, but if it's, I'll just use this one. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation. We'll have to turn the lights down a little bit. Use the pointer just a little bit during this presentation. Both the committee are embracing the fact that those of you in the audience, you can turn. I can't point in 2 different directions at once. Well, I don't plan on using this a lot. Will help with the presentation as we go along. So first,
Hicks, before you go any further, can we please get you a microphone so people online can hear you?
Try the one. Can you hear me? All right. Test working. Okay, so first, just a little bit of introduction. You're probably wondering why a state senator is up here giving a presentation on forest management and water yield. And so I'll just give you a little bit of background as to why I'm here and why I'm doing this. To start with, I did my master's degree at Montana State, and as part of that, I calculated evapotranspiration, how much water plants used as they grow during the year. Worked at the University of Wyoming for a number of years. I'm one of those PhD ABDs, all but dissertation. But my graduate work at both schools was in plant physiology, with an emphasis on agronomy. So my background, my educational backgrounds comes from calculating evapotranspiration, how much water plants use, and then the physiology of plants. But fast forward into that, into my professional capacity, I'm the district manager for Conservation District in the Colorado River Basin and the Little Snake River Basin. Served in that capacity for over 32 years. In that capacity, I've been involved with the Forest Service for a number of years, going back to the year 2000, at which time the local conservation district and including 7 different conservation districts in 5 counties petitioned the Forest Service as cooperating agencies on the development of the Medicine Bow National Forest Resource Plan. In that capacity, I served as the staffer for those 7 conservation districts in those 5 counties to interface with the Forest Service on the development of the plan as a cooperating agency. At that point in time, we actually got granted to participate at the ID team level, the interdisciplinary team that reviews all the science, all the public comments, all the development of the alternatives. Fast forward to that, record a decision in 2003 on the Medicine Bow National Forest Plan. My conservation district that I work for entered into an agreement with the Forest Service to do one of the first stewardship contracts in all. Region 2 was the new tool that was authorized by Congress of the Forest Service. So my background and my education lends it well to this subject of forestry and water yield and evapotranspiration and my workload, working with a number of federal agencies, including the BLM on timber projects, fuels projects, leads me. So I'm not here in my capacity so much today as my elected, but as my technical and work background in this subject of dealing with forestry management and water yield. And so with that, if we could go ahead and get the presentation up, please. So next slide. So just a little bit of background. We're in the Colorado River Basin. There's about 40 million people that get their drinking water out of the Colorado. Approximately 155,000 or 28% of the population of the state of Wyoming gets all or portion. I don't think a lot of people understand that the city of Cheyenne, while it's not in the Colorado River Basin, gets 40% of their drinking water from the Colorado River Basin through a trans-basin diversion. About 70% of the runoff in the Colorado River Basin comes out of Colorado, 15% from Utah and Wyoming. Wyoming's share predominantly comes from the Green River Basin, which is the very headwaters of the Colorado. Wyoming is entitled to 14% of all the yield from the upper basin. If we look at that, we also have Utah and New Mexico. Wyoming is one of the only states left in the Colorado River Basin that doesn't fully allocate their entitlement to the Colorado River. We use approximately 11% of the 14% that we're entitled to. Now, the other states of Utah and New Mexico are close. They may have a little water year that they haven't utilized, but the thing that we have to understand here, that's water that was predicated on assumptions of the hydrology in the 1920s. That water doesn't exist anymore. So that's what we would call paper water. You have a legal right to it if it exists, but the fact is it doesn't exist today. So that gets us to the grips that we're dealing with allocations and declining supplies, and why we're here today to talk about water supply. So just a quick question for the committee. So when those of you that are familiar with the Colorado and all the reservoirs and the rivers and the water basin, the question is, what's the largest reservoir manager of water in the Colorado River Basin? Anybody want to take a guess at that one? Bureau of Reclamation? Any other suggestions on that? What are they doing to manage the reservoir for the beneficial use of water as a user in the basin? Well, what if I was to tell you that it wasn't the Bureau of Reclamation? Next slide. The largest reservoir in the Colorado River Basin is actually this. You see all this white stuff? That's the Continental Divide that runs right through there, folks. So you see this is the Continental Divide. There's the state of Wyoming. Here we are sitting right up here. That's the winds, the Wyoming Range, the Ashley National Forest, the Medicine Bow, all the way down. The largest reservoir in the Colorado River Basin is the snowpack on the National Forest. Our high elevation snowpack. That's where all that stuff that the Bureau of Reclamation receives later that they try to manage. So when you look at this slide, so you look at all that reservoir and that reservoir and that reservoir, you see that little dot right down there? It's so small I can't even hold on. That's a Flaming Gorge. You can't even see this in context. Somewhere down here is Lake Powell, and as we get right down there is Lake Mead. So you have to constrain your idea that the water in reservoirs is tied up in the snowpack. In fact, 70% of all the water in the Colorado River Basin comes out of the snowpack. So what are we doing to managing the reservoir and the snowpack? So now that we know that it's not the Bureau of Reclamation, it's actually the United States Forest Service is the largest reservoir manager within the Colorado, and I will extend that to say the entire Western United States, because if you get into the Sierra Range out in California, it's the same scenario over west-wide. West-wide, about 70% of all water comes off of our national forest. So let's talk about national forest and the Forest Service and their role in this. So Forest Service is really an animal of an act promulgated by Congress called the Organic Act of 1897. Two primary purposes of the Organic Act, and we won't go into all the history as to why it was enacted and what was the purpose. But the two primary purposes were securing favorable conditions for water flows and to furnish a continuous supply of timber for the necessity of the citizens of the United States. Now, I would argue maybe that mission hasn't been fulfilled as late, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But that was the original purpose as to what the Forest Reserve System, which later come the Forest Service to manage those forest reserves for the people of the United States. Those were the two original purposes. So, a couple of things I've really grappled with, try to how to get our head around this as the legislative committees so a couple of things I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today is the history, the science, and then maybe we'll have a discussion about the policies. And I think Speaker Summers alluded to some of that earlier, and some of you other folks talked about some of the policy issues, and then what can we do as a legislature. The first thing that I have to do is convince you the science behind water yield. Can we manage vegetation to increase water yield? And the simple fact is there is a preponderance. There is a massive amount of scientific research, much of it done by the Forest Service themselves on experimental watershed, that shows if we can manage that vegetation and we actually want to increase water yield, we have the capability of doing that. There's been a number of experiments on the Fraser experimental forest fish in Colorado, but the literature is replete. And I'm not going to go through all these, but we can go all the way back to the 1920s, all the way up to the current day. And we know, and in fact, in one time, the Forest Service had in their Forest Manual of Management prescriptions, an actual prescription called water yield, that you could manage a piece of forest land to increase water. That was its primary purpose. Now we know it's a multiple use agency and there's a lot of other things to take into consideration. So when we look at that, you have to look at slope, aspect, species, participation, how is it a high precip zone, age of the trees, all these things to come in. But the simple fact is we can manage forested landscapes for increased water yield. And we can also do that in the context of providing other multiple use benefits, such things like supplying a reliable supply of timber, grazing habitat for domestic livestock, habitat for wildlife, recreation opportunities. All these things exist within the context of being able to manage our national forests, with part of that purpose being to increase water yield. This just goes on and cites some of the other research that was done as we move through this. So this is just an example of some of the experiences that I've had working in this arena. So in 2006-07, we had a pandemic of mountain pine beetle that ravaged all of North America, all the way from Alaska, all the way down to southern states. Some of them were spruce bark beetles, but the simple fact is our forests were being destroyed by beetles, insect epidemics. So in 2009, as a result of that epidemic, we started working on the private, the state, and the BLM lands to address some of these issues. So this is just a photo of a fuel break that we put in. That was 2009, 2013. And then this is 2016. But if we just back up one, I want to show you, if you're going to see in a series of slides now, you're going to see this all the way down. You're going to see this all the way through this presentation. So let's move forward to the next slide. Go ahead. This is another picture of the same fuel break 13 miles away. This is post-construction. Again, you see these lines. That's the boundary between, in this particular case, the BLM and the Medicine Bow National Forest. Go ahead. So when you look at Google Earth and the satellite image, this is what you see. So that picture that we were just looking at was taken off a county road right there. That's a 400-foot wide fuel break all the way down. It narrowed up a little bit based on vegetation, slope, and topography. That's the boundary between the private and the Medicine Bow National Forest. Next slide, please. So this is another portion of that. I want you to focus your attention here in this area here. And so you can't see it very well, but you're starting to see all of this red stuff. And so if we look at this, this is right towards the kind of the height of the mountain pine beetle epidemic on the Medicine Bow National Forest. And it spilled off. It wasn't just on the forest, it was on all lands up there. But I want you to focus right here. So next slide, please. That's the same line. That happens to be a section of BLM ground. That's private. You can see the construction of the fuel break. And that's state land, and the state land and Forester actually implemented a timber sale on that with the idea of reducing fuels. Byproduct of was increasing forage for livestock, reducing catastrophic fire loss. But I can tell you this is a pretty common occurrence across almost the entire west side of the Medicine Bow National Forest. Next slide, please. So talk about those other benefits. It may not be just a suppression of catastrophic wildfires, which we've had, which every forest is going to experience. But talk about, so this was some interesting byproduct. The same time that we're doing all this work on vegetation management, the Game and Fish Department was collaring mule deer. We got a designated migration corridor. So one of the things that I found very interesting, these were actually some buck mule deer that they collared. But when you look at this area right there, and that right there, those clusters of points are called stopover areas, places where mule deer really like to spend a lot of time. They typically spend a lot of time there because it's really good habitat. There's a lot of good available forage and browse. Those two areas are the two areas that I just showed you in those pictures. Those are treated areas. So apparently it's not only just a supply of timber, improve the habitat for mule deer, it supplied timber. All of the timber that came off of those went to the sawmill in Saratoga. But it also, when you look at that, we have this thing up here called High Savory Reservoir that sits about right there. One of our objectives was not only to reduce fuels and fires and improve habitat, but was also to increase some water yield into that reservoir. That's a reservoir that's owned and operated by the state of Wyoming, supplies water for the municipalities of Dixon and Baggs, and then also for about 14,000 acres of irrigated ground in the Little Snake River Basin. So just a little bit about that. So one of the things that we need to understand as the legislative committee is this: what role has the legislature had, and what is it costing us to deal with this issue of lost water yield associated with forest management? So this just goes through a little bit of history. In 2004, the state of Wyoming's spent over $14 million with NCAR and a number of scientists and private firms researching the impact, whether we could actually increase water yield associating with augmenting snowpack through cloud seeding. So that started in 2004. We spent $14 million as a state of Wyoming on those studies, just looking at them and trying to make a determination whether cloud seeding was an opportunity. Again, the reason that we're seeding cloud is we're augmenting snow. That's that reservoir that sits up on the Continental Divide that accumulates mostly on Forest Service land. So the other thing that was driving a lot of this stuff in 2004 was also the Platte River. And the same situation was driven by Endangered Species Act compliance through litigation between Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska. Nebraska sued Wyoming and says, Wyoming, you're using too much Platte River water. Colorado intervened in the lawsuit, went all the way to the federal court systems. The Supreme Court issued or appointed a special master on this case. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service intervened in the lawsuit, said, guess what? All you guys' water use up there is causing potential. So we have piping plovers, whooping cranes, and one other species. It's piping plovers, pallid sturgeon, or 3 endangered species. And according to the Fish and Wildlife Service, it was due to water depletion. So through 2005 and through that period, the state of Wyoming spent another substantial amount of money to the tune of we've spent on the North Platte based on water yield, supplying water for endangered species compliant, $36.2 million. That's an ongoing obligation. We actually contribute money to buy land in central Nebraska for those species. But we did Pathfinder modification, which was a raised Pathfinder dam. Most of that water in Pathfinder goes to endangered species obligations in central Nebraska. So why is that important? So just some other costs that we've incurred as we've gone along. Now, this is more Colorado River Basin that the legislature has incurred. Just recently, 2 years ago, we put another position in the Attorney General's office specifically to deal with the issue of water in Colorado. We put 3 FTEs in the state engineer's office in the last 2 years, 1 in the water development office. We appropriated $25 million to try to acquire additional storage space in Fontenelle Reservoir, $2 million for the environmental impact statement with the Bureau of Reclamation to look at NEPA compliance on Fontenelle. So cloud seeding, what's it cost to seed clouds? Again, why are we seeding clouds? We're trying to augment snowpack, that reservoir on the Continental Divide. You can see the thing that you need to take away is the continued cost escalation. We're now up to $1 million a year to seed clouds in both the Wind Rivers and the Sierra Madres and the Laramie Range. We're trying to generate water, folks. That's why we're seeding clouds. Okay, so why is this important? This gets back to a lot of the research that was done on the North Platte and what's driving some of these costs. And this deals specifically with the issue of forest management. So there's an executive summary on the impact of stream flow on the North Platte. This was a kind of a court ordered by the federal court system associated with the Medicine Bow National Forest Plan back in 2000. So the takeaway here that from all of this research that was done by the hydrologist was since the time they backed it up and they say 1860 was pre any anthropogenic impact, European impact on forest activities. In other words, it was pretty pristine. We can age trees back. You take a tree ring, you know how old it is. Forest Service does a very good job of that, understanding what the age structure of those forests were. The hydrologist looked at that and they went down to a 3-meter pixel. So basically, 9 yards. And they can look at that and look at those trees, look at the species, look at the age, look at the canopy cover and stuff, and then they can back that up. So based on their analysis, just due to forest succession, they only looked at Forest Service lands. just looking at forest succession from the time of 1860 to 1997, we had lost 160,000 acre feet of water yield out of the upper North Platte, just because we get more and older trees, and accumulation of biomass that transpires, increased sublimation, which sublimation is when that snow sits on the branches of those trees. It goes from snow directly into the atmosphere. So you see in all these hydrological things that are going on associated with accumulation of forests. So the next component of that was where I come into the situation and is in my capacity, and we, yep.
And go
Okay.
ahead, Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I just thought it'd be easier now because.
No, if you do it, I apologize. If you have questions, it's better to, because this is a lot of issues that we're going to wrap up or go over here today.
So I understand the sublimation. I understand also, more straws in the bucket, right? Ultimately that, trees are straw. What happens, we had this huge beetle kill, right? So we've lost the canopy to a great degree in much of that forest because the branches are gone. So as you go along, a lot of this study, I'm curious, segment that out in this discussion. So we had a whole forest that was pristine or was really old growth, right? We didn't have a fire, we didn't have timbering. What we had is instead the beetle came in and the beetle killed it. And so we still would have more sublimation out of that beetle kill section than we would out of a flat, just out of a place where you came and did a clear cut, for example. So when you talk about all this, I want to at some point understand how the forest today that's 50 or 60% dead relates to the studies you're talking about.
So I'll just tell you, in fact, the Select Water Committee a number of years ago actually funded the same hydrologist that did this work for the North Platte. Because at the time there was the University of Wyoming was doing some research, what they call the GLEES and the Snowy Range just out of Laramie up there. They're doing plot level analysis. I mean, they're looking at little plots on the ground and trying to make an inference of the overall entire North Platte, Laramie River drainage off the Medicine Bow, Arapahoe Roosevelt, Route National and all that, whether there was any influence to water yield associated with the beetle kill. The plot level data assumptions that came out of the research that came out of the University of Wyoming says we don't see any increase in water yield. So it only defies logic in all the previous research, and it wasn't what they assumed that they were going to get. So the legislature, through the Select Water Committee and the Water Development, hired the same hydrologists, C.A. Trundle and J.M. Nankervis, to go in and look at that. And so they went in and looked at it on a macro scale, and they were able to find some increased water yield associated with beetle kills. Now, what they'll tell you in the report is it wasn't like if you'd have gone in there and taken 25% of the basal area, because you still have the skeletons that provide some shading, which reduces some of that sublimation, direct evaporation off the snowpack. But just by having those skeletons, and keep in mind, the beetle kill wasn't 100% mortality like you would get with a wildfire or a clear cut type of scenario. So we had a little bit of conflicting report. The University of Wyoming says we can't find it. These hydrologists on macro scale looked at it, and they looked at gauging station data, and they said we can see it. There is a little more water showing up associated, but it wasn't the level that you would have gone in if you'd have done either a wildfire or a prescribed burn or something of that nature. So I hope that answers that question. So as we go on, so back up just real quick. So at the very end of this, so we know from 1860 to 1940, we lost 160,000 acre feet out of the upper North Platte. At 2003, there was a record decision on the forest plan back when I started working with the Forest Service in 2000. that they adopted a plan in the record of decision. The very same hydrologists that have done all this says, Forest Service, if you adopt this plan, which they did, you're further going to reduce the amount of water running into the North Platte by an additional 27,000 acre feet a day. I'm not going to go into all the details, but they went into very detailed and said, look, if we'll take the portion of the forest that you can actually manage for logging, for timber harvest, you put that on a 100-year rotation and you manage it for that purpose, you could actually gain about 55 million acre feet of water back. The record of decision was not to do that. The record of decision was to say, we're going to allow this forest to get older and accumulate more biomass and cost the state and the water users an additional 27,000 acre feet of water. That was the 2000 recommendation that came out. So just a little history on this forest. So during the Reagan administration, they cut 40 million board feet a year off of this forest. The forest grows 50 million board feet a year at that time. So when we did the forest plan, the analysis was 50 million board feet. That's how much wood we're accumulating every year on that national forest. At the very height, at the highest level of timber harvest off the Medbo that we've ever seen was under the Reagan administration. It was 40 million. The lowest we saw was the end of the Clinton administration. It was 2.8 million, and we lost 3 sawmills. We lost the sawmill in Laramie, we lost the sawmill in Encampment, and we lost LP Mill in Saratoga. Effective forest policy on timber drives water. Effective forest management policy drives fire on forests. Water, fire, and forest are all interrelated and interdependent. And that's what you have to understand. It's not just timber, it's water. And it's grazing and it's wildlife habitat. And all these things are interwoven in this. So just a little bit of history that will lead up to a resolution passed by the Wyoming legislature. In 1999, due to the droughts and all of this accumulating fuels and the declining water supplies, there was a group of water users, Coalition for Sustainable Resources, which was a Colorado, incorporated in Colorado, but many of the members of that were members of the Upper North Platte Water Users Association in Wyoming. So they filed a lawsuit because their fear was this, with this endangered species issue on the North Platte, the loss of 160,000 acre feet, they're going to lose their water. There's going to be a curtailment. You're going to have to give it up, and particularly some of the junior users. So they filed a lawsuit, went all the way to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in December. The court said, highlighted it down there, we hold that this case is not yet ripe. The coalition challenged the Forest Service inaction, but this inaction is insufficiently final for review. In other words, they hadn't suffered injury yet. They couldn't prove that there was damages associated. Now, this predates the forest plan record of decision. The court also directed the Forest Service, you'll address this issue of water yield in that plan. Well, they did. They said, we're going to adopt a plan that's going to reduce water yield by an additional 27,000 acre feet a year above and beyond the 160 that you've currently historically lost when we back that forest up. So this resulted in a joint resolution by the legislature in 2023 that declared an emergency, declared the state of emergency in the watersheds located on national forests within Wyoming using the policies and contract powers of the state and the applicable federal laws. I'm not going to read this to you. But the legislature felt compelled to act based on this issue of forest management and the continual reduction of water yield for our water users off the national forest. So fast forward, we're into 2014, 15, 16, the Medicine Bow National Forest decided to do what they called the LAVA, landscape area vegetation analysis, with a very aggressive approach to look at treating up to 6,000 acres on the Medicine Bow National Forest. But there was a problem with that analysis. They adopted what they call an equivalent clear-cut area restriction, which is designed to look at how much water you generate if you do an activity, whether it's a burn, a timber sale, whatever activity, how much water is that going to generate? So they artificially constrained through that entire analysis what we could do on the landscape and said, if you just have, and it's a modeling exercise. It was a misappropriation of how the ECA methodology is used by the Forest Service. It was misconstrued as to what the purpose was for ECA. But they adopted it and said, look, we get to 25% disturbance, could be wildfire, could be timber harvest, could be a habitat treatment. We're just going to stop everything. No more vegetation management. And those 70 different went down to a very small watershed. So think of those little tiny creeks, maybe as small as 10,000 acres. It could have been 10,000 acres of beetle kill. But we can't treat 75% of it under the constraints of what they adopted in 2018. So consequently, the Select Water Committee said, no, this is not right. You're misusing the science. And so the Select Water Committee submitted a letter, it's in your folders before you, to the Forest Service, strongly encouraging them not to set an artificial cap to say you're only going to create 25% of the landscape. And that's all you can do. Because again, we're in the Colorado and the North Platte Basin and the Medbo. We got endangered species on one side and we have complex obligations on the Colorado on the other side. Fast forward to all those expenditures for snowpack that we're putting up there. Why in the heck would we be spending millions of dollars trying to augment the snowpack at the very time we have a forest management plan that says we don't want to increase water yield? A little contradictory in policy there, guys. Go ahead. So state of Wyoming is not alone in this. So the Family Farm Alliance, which represents irrigated agriculture in 11 Western states, has testified before Congress numerous times on this issue of forest health and water yield. I'm just going to run through these pretty quick. This is October 20th, 2021. Approved condition of our nation's watersheds. This testimony here was before the House Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, Forestry Subcommittee, again by Family Farm Alliance on June 7th, 2022. You can read it. The management restricting timber is resulting in a loss of timber harvest. Again, in 2022, June 24th. Now this is between the Senate, in front of the Senate committee. Additional testimony on this issue of water yield and forest management. Next one, again, was in June 14th of 2014, and then the last one was in March 8th of 2023. Resoundingly, Western irrigators in the United States understand the implications of forest management. Remember, the biggest reservoir in the entire Western United States, it's not unique to the Colorado. California is grappling with the same thing. Some of the latest research that comes out shows a lot of the catastrophic wildfires that they've had in California are actually increasing some water yield in some of those basins. But they also have significant watershed damage associated with those. So here we are. Let's go ahead. So what are we talking about when we're talking about forest health? So this is the landscape view of a watershed over in the Little Snake, part of the Colorado River Basin here in Wyoming. That's what you see is you see conifers starting to replace aspen trees. But when you look underneath that, what you see is what we call forest succession. We transition from something like aspen that's deciduous, that has tremendous wildlife habitat values, it has a lot of livestock grazing associated with it, and it yields more water, captures more carbon than when we get to the point that you see the photo on the right. And now we're in a situation where we've lost water yield. We're at the risk of catastrophic. We don't have any agricultural uses up there as far as livestock grazing underneath that bottom picture on the right. That's what's happening across the board. And ultimately, we end up with a situation like this where we have dead, dying, massive beetle kill, and ultimately catastrophic wildfires. I took this picture just the other day. It was at a Capital Finance Committee meeting up in Jackson. This is a picture of the Bridger Teton National Forest on Togety Pass just a couple of weeks ago. That's an old growth forest that's dying. And the interesting thing is the United States Department of Agriculture, Forest Service just released, back up, please. Just released, I want to highlight this. Go ahead and let's back up because it's important. Keep going. Back, one more. So, darn thing. So Forest Service said trees are in an August 11 publication, 2020. Trees are climate change, carbon storage heroes. This came out of the Forest Products Laboratory with the U.S. Forest Service. In July of this year, USDA released that forests are losing their ability to hold carbon. The new USDA report says it predicts that by 2025, that many of our national forests are going to be carbon emitters instead of carbon sinks. So see that photo up there? That's starting to become a carbon emitter. As that thing continues to die and decompose, it's going to put more carbon into the atmosphere than it's going to sequester through wood or through soils. This is Forest Service data. So you think about that in the context of water. If we're going to start emitting forests, and there's estimates right now, our national forests sequester about 10% of all carbon produced in the United States. To their giant sink, reverse that. If you believe in carbon-driven climate change, it doesn't speak well that we're going to get hotter, which is going to reduce the amount of water that's available coming off our national forest. So how do we reverse that? We reverse that through actively managing our forests. This is a series of photos taken over along Highway 70 on the Medicine Bow National Forest on a project that was conducted over there. So it was to go in there and remove all the subalpine fir in those very thick, dense communities. You see 2007, 2008, now we're at 2011, and you start to see all that new regrowth come up. And then you get to 2013, and now if you go up there, that stuff's all taller than your head. That is sequestering carbon, providing wildlife habitat, yielding water, and providing grazing opportunities. That's what active management does. It accomplishes all of those. So we have the tools to be able to address this issue of forest health, declining water supplies, catastrophic wildfire on our national forest. Just some of the other tools at our disposal is commercial, small scale timber harvest. This is actually the photo up on the right was a state land in holding in the forest where we did a timber sale up there to provide some woody materials, actually for some stream restoration work. Same thing, tools are all out there, folks, to accomplish this. This was a project that we did in concert with the Medicine Bow National Forest, 400 acres of conifer removal in aspen. We took those trees rather than just pile them and burn them, and we chipped them and we sent them out there, and Devon Energy and Anadarko Petroleum Company used those wood chips for reclamation purposes. And guess what they did? All that carbon's still in the soil. But we also facilitated those same things: water, wildlife, and agriculture. And then an aesthetic value of having all that aspen compared to these dying and dead subalpine fir forest like we see on Togety Pass or in our area up there. So next photo, please. Just part of the wood chipping operation. Again, just some of the other photos. This is a fuels habitat project. Go ahead. What it looks like 4 years later. Another one. Now, this is one that we just completed. You see this line? That's the forest boundary. It can be done. We just need our partners to step up to the plate and start getting aggressive in the ability to manage our federal lands and our federal forests for all that multitude. I think it was Representative Alaman talked about what are those benefits that we derive, and are some of them pie in the sky. We can quantify exactly how much water we can get. We can quantify how many acres of high quality mule deer habitat we have. We can quantify how many pounds of forage that we're producing for agriculture. And with the mule deer comes recreation. With the recreation, we can quantify how much money those people are putting into our economy. So we can quantify all of these benefits of active forest management and to the economy and to the people of the state of Wyoming. With that, what's next, folks? What's the policy issues that this committee or these committees, Select Water and the Joint Agriculture, you know, we've seen our predecessors do everything from weigh in to letters on environmental impact statements on this issue of water yield. We've seen the past legislature weigh in with joint resolutions. We, as many of us sitting here, we've put additional positions into the Attorney General's office. We put them into the state forester. I think, was it 2 years ago, Speaker Summers, that we put 2 or 3 more GNA foresters from the state level. So there's a whole rift of policy issues that we need to figure out as a legislature is what is our role? I can tell you from my perspective is we lack at the state of Wyoming, the technical level to really weigh in on a lot of these heavy water yield issues associated with modeling the impacts of these forest plans that I don't see Ken Conley was here earlier, but yeah, he's talking about that. You know, the Ashley is not coming up with the timber targets. It's not just timber. It's water, it's agriculture. All of these things revolve around on how we manage that vegetation on those national forests. The BT's coming up. Does the committee want to weigh in on a letter or a recommendation to look at this issue of water yield off the BT? It is literally the headwaters of the Colorado River system. We're gonna spend $25 million acquiring water in a BOR facility down here. Maybe we should spend $25 million on the forest, providing timber, wildlife habitat, recreation, livestock forage, instead of buying what's left over once it comes off the largest reservoir in the Colorado River Basin and every other river basin in the Western United States. So that's a question for you. What's next? Where does this committee and these committees want to go? Do we want to draft up a resolution? Do we want to take a hard look at supplying our state and our water users the technical needs they need to do to model the impacts of water yield from the Ashley Forest, the Bridger Teton National Forest, the Medicine Bow National Forest? What do we need to do to engage our federal partners, which we've done with all the GNA foresters, those good neighbor foresters that we put in there? So we have some pretty tough choices. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. What do you want to do next?
All right. Thank you, Senator Hicks. I think we have a lot to think about, and we'll be chewing on this for the next couple of days. Are there any questions? He escaped before we could ask that, but he could answer them from his chair. Any questions? Representative Conrad.
Here, Madam Chair. Hicks, just a clarifying question, actually, too, in particular. You had noted earlier that our 14% out of Colorado River Compact, we're only using 11%. My question then, is that because that's only 11% that is available, or where's the other 3%? Is it going away, or is it not even there? I guess I'm hard to reconcile that. Good to see you.
That's fine. Go ahead.
If you could repeat your question, please, Representative Conrad.
Or Senator Hicks, clarifying question. You had mentioned earlier that our allocation through the Colorado Compact is 14%, but we're only utilizing.
Correct.
So where's the deficit or the difference? That's question one.
So we're entitled to 14% of the upper basin.
Mhm.
If we don't use it, it runs downstream, and under the provisions in the compact, if some state doesn't use it, another state can. And so if you go back to that slide, there's a raging debate in Colorado, but most of the data that I've seen would suggest, and so the Colorado River District, there's a white paper that was produced by the Colorado Water Institute. It's a compilation of scientists and legal professions from CSU and CU Boulder that says Colorado's overdrafting their share of the Colorado, which they're completely entitled to do. And if you look at the overdraft and just a gross estimate of the hydrology, their overdraft is very close to that 3% Wyoming doesn't use, which they're entitled to. There's also a provision in the compact that says if there is a call or curtailment, in other words, the lower basin calls out the upper basin, any state that's overdrafted their share is responsible for replacing that before any other state has to comply with any lower basin calls. And so it's a very nuanced thing, but it's something because we are the state that primarily doesn't use ours. We're also the state that would be the most advantaged if there was a lower basin call on the upper basin, because we don't have to give any water up if we actually can prove that Colorado is using more than they're entitled to. They're obligated to replace all that water under the compact. Now they'll argue, the argument it's raging in Colorado and it's a front range west slope issue. You have to understand there's 14 trans-basin diversions in Colorado that move water from the Colorado River Basin to the front range of Colorado. So the population center wants the water. The west slope says you've already taken more than you're entitled to. You don't get any more. And at some point in time, the state of Wyoming, through the Upper Colorado River Commission, may have to weigh in on that discussion because it's inherently in our best interest if we ever got to a curtailment that has to be resolved in Colorado, because we would be able to continue to go on irrigating and using for industrial and our municipal uses like we always have under that provision in the compact. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Follow up. Senator Hicks, then one last question for you. Your perspective and opinion on cloud seeding. Money well spent or better spent somewhere else?
Madam Chairman, that is a long, protracted discussion. And so if you go through the entire analysis, so just going to do a quick hydrological review of how cloud seeding works. Is number one, and only works on years where you have big snowpack events. If you don't have a seedable event, it's a drought, you don't get a lot of benefit from it. So the real benefit is like winters like last year, where we've seen this twice in the Laramie and the Sierra Madre ranges where we've had to shut down the seeding because we've accumulated. And there is some data that suggests it actually does increase. It's not whether it increases the snow water equivalent. That the question that the legislature asks is at what cost? How many dollars per acre foot? But you have to understand it only works when you have a lot of big wet winters and then you can accumulate a lot of moisture. It doesn't do any good then if you don't have a reservoir then to put it in to carry it over for the next year and the next year that you're droughted out. So if you accumulate it on a wet year like this year, we had all the water we needed anyway. I don't know anybody that was short of water. What we need it for is the next big drought. You only accomplish that through storage. Now on the North Platte system, we have more than ample storage. You know, you've got Seminole, Alcova, Glendo, Guernsey. I mean, we have more storage in the North Platte than 2 or 3 years complete runoff of the river. We have a little bit of storage in the Colorado River Basin, but certainly not adequate to do the carryover component, because the one big facility is Fontenelle and it's below where 95 or 98% of all irrigation occurs. It does supply some municipal water. So the answer to your question is not is it good or bad? The question is at what cost, and is it the best allocation of cost? And without storage, why are we doing it? That's the questions I ask myself all the time.
Senator Grew has been patient online, and then we'll go to the rest of the questions in the room. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, give me a sense, and I'm sorry to, well, show my ignorance once again. Of course, you well know it, but in the area you're talking about, the area around Medbo and the areas that you were speaking of, how much state land is there versus federal land? And I guess my point is in asking that is, you know, we obviously in Wyoming have one view of this, how we should be managing this forest. They have another. If we manage the state lands the way we feel it should be done to maximize the utility, maximize the water yield, maximize the forest, you know, the forest potential, all the things that we want to try to get out of it, and we're sitting right next to them, what would those numbers look like as far as percentage wise? How much of state land could we affect with our policies versus what's there? Just give me a sense of it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So a specific reference to the Medbo, which is I'm most familiar with, is it's roughly about 6% state land. And the vast majority of that state land is at lower elevations, which they're lower precip areas. So consequently, they yield less water. So if we take all the state land and we took all of the private land that was forested or say it had heavy shrub community, we're probably down to talking maybe 10-12% of the total water yield that comes off. So, but as you've seen through some of the photos that I showed, a lot of that's already been treated on those state and private lands adjacent to the national forest. And even state forestry has conducted a lot of timber sales on those in-holding state sections that they have access to, a number of them that we can't get to. But we've treated the vast majority of the forested private and state lands within those watersheds.
Representative Allemand, unless you had a follow-up. Are you good? All right, Representative Allemand.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, the 3% that we do not use, do we sell or can we sell that 3% as a state? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, that's been an ongoing debate for about 15 or 20 years. The answer is it depends. We can't sell it to the lower basin states, and we don't have to. The demand is right now with both of our neighbors in the Wasatch Front and the Front Range of Colorado. You don't have to send water to Las Vegas. We have willing customers right now. There's still a lot of nuanced stuff. One of the things that we're going to have to grapple with is the reality of every basin state is that our percentage, that 14%, is half of the Colorado River Basin's allocation. So we get 7.5 million that we split, but that's paper water. With the 20-year ongoing drought that we're having in the Colorado River Basin, the yield is not 7.5 million acre foot. It's probably somewhere more between 6 and 6.5. So the simple fact is there is some legal mechanism that we could transfer or sell some of that water. But realistically, it would only be water that was carried over from a previous hydrological year. With the declining hydrology and the increasing demand, it's feasible. I don't know if it's practical at this point in time that the state of Wyoming would want to start selling. I think it's always something that we should examine. Now, keep in mind, under state statutes, we have a component called the export statute. So if the state wanted to sell water out of state, anything over 1,000 acre feet requires the approval of the legislature to do that. But so the answer is it would really depend on where and how much it was worth.
Are you good? Okay, Representative Summers. Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, question, comments. Madam Chairman, thank you. So Cloud seeding does help Lake Powell, which ultimately helps us, which is some of the reason that cloud seeding was originally paid for partly by lower basin states because it helps the hydrology of the river. So in essence, even though it would be better stored in Wyoming, I agree with you. There is some utility in storing that water in Powell because ultimately that can aid us in our obligations below Powell. So that's one comment I'd have on that. And then as it relates to the 11%, 14%, you know, as you know, sitting on that advisory group, the state sometimes says, you know, maybe we can't get to that 14%. Maybe our 11% is about where the river's at. So we don't know really where that is because nobody knows exactly how the consumptive use argument will come up when there is a curtailment, if there is a curtailment. So I hope we have better hydrology and we have 14, and we do have 3% to tinker with, but that question still remains, I think. And so I guess at this point, a legislator, wouldn't you agree? Senator Hicks.
Any remarks on that? Senator Hicks?
So Mr. Chairman, and the speaker's correct that a number of lower basin municipalities, including Las Vegas, I think Los Angeles, Phoenix, Bureau of Reclamation, contributed some money to the cloud seeding programs. We have no evidence whatsoever that any of it ever made it to Lake Powell. And so getting back to the Wyoming model where we're not using somewhere between 160 and 200,000 acre feet on a wet year like this, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 or 100,000 acre feet that we use, it never makes it to Lake Powell because it's being diverted by Colorado because they're overdrafting, which they're completely entitled to do under the compact. So the cloud seeding would only work if we were able to shepherd it. Other than that, it'll never make it to Lake Powell. And so far we have no verifiable scientific information that all the cloud seeding that we've done for a decade has any of it's made it to Lake Powell. And it's feasible, but as long as your neighbor downstream has taken all of it, it never makes it there.
Representative Diamond.
Madam Chairman. Senator Hicks, what capacity do we hold in Wyoming to be able to create structures on the Colorado River drainage to retain this water? I mean, I know this is probably an ungodly amount of money we're talking about here, but I mean, what options are there down there that a person could look at to be able to hold some of this water back and to be able to meter it out and when appropriate? And do you have any idea on what that would look like and going forward?
Sure.
Yeah, Madam Chairman and Representative Nyman, and I think that the state is taking a very proactive role at that. I mean, we're trying to acquire all that additional space in Fontenelle as one, which is Fontenelle's 396,000 acre foot reservoir. We currently have contracts for 121. So we're trying to acquire that differential. We've also got plans to potentially, federal legislation directed the Bureau of Reclamation that they shall allow the state of Wyoming to riprap the bottom of Fontenelle. We'll talk about that on the tour. There's 80,000 acre feet of water there that's unallocated. There's no riprap, so they can't draw it down that low. That's a project we're looking at. We've got 2 storage projects here in Sublette County. One's a Middle Piney Reservoir, and I can't remember the name of the other one. It's on the forest that we're at New Fork Lake. We're looking at doing some modifications to the outlet structure there, Middle Piney. We're reconstructing a dam there. We've got one in the environmental impact statement is now underway with the Forest Service on the West Fork of Battle Creek and the Little Snake Basin. So again, those are ongoing projects that we're looking at storage or acquiring storage to be able to utilize for that water. And Fontenelle is critically important for particularly our trona industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Sweetwater County. And so we need to shore up not only those agricultural water, but also our, again, 40% of the largest municipality in the state of Wyoming, Cheyenne, gets their drinking water, replaces what they take out out of the Colorado and the Little Snake. So it's our municipalities, our big industry. So next biggest water user is right now scheduled to come offline is thermal thermal energy production, the coal mines and the coal-fired power plant. Has water right for about 25,000 acre feet just on Bridger power plant out there east of Rock Springs. So our big industries are heavily invested in the reliability of our water supplies.
All right, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Hicks, thank you for that presentation. That was very informative, learned a lot. What I hear out through a lot of the committee meetings is our federal partners. You asked the question, what next? To me, the root of the problem, no pun intended on your presentation, is our partners have different goals. Our partner in the federal government, the Forest Department, they're not interested in increased yield, especially with this new administration. At the top level, maybe more locally, they're in line with us, but the leadership in the Interior Department and the BLM, I'm not entirely sure about the Forest Service, but we've got a partner that doesn't want to, has no interest in our goals. What would your comment be to that on how we, instead of just having a seat at the table, what do we do different here? Thank you.
Well, that's a loaded question coming for you, Senator, because I got a pretty good idea what your answer would be. But so I want to characterize and step back from my position as a senator in the Wyoming State Legislature and talk about my 30 years of experience of working with the federal agencies. I'm a little bit empathetic. Is there nothing more than a football? They get tossed from one end of the field to the other end of the field, as you've articulated, as administrations change back and forth. And that's who sets the broad policy. So they're a continual ping pong back and forth. I've worked with a number of federal employees all the way up to, forest supervisors to regional foresters who would really like to manage the forest, but they continually get litigated. And so the answer to your question is we need to use all those tools that are available to us as a legislature, which the one that we've been a little bit reluctant to lose, and I hate to use it, but when you're in an environment that the most responsive that you get from a federal agency is litigation, that ought to be on the table. We're not litigating individuals, we're litigating issues, and we need to keep it that way. This whole issue of water yield at some point in time is going to come to a boiling point. I see the BT as the big picture item here, that at some point in time with the amount of water that's generated off the Bridger-Teton National Forest going into a planning amendment. So we need to upscale our technical abilities at the state agency level. The legislature needs to fund that level of technology and need, and we need to be prepared to support those local governments in these endeavors because they have cooperating agencies. Said sometimes it feels to me like it's the equivalent of going to the federal court system with a bunch of Harvard lawyers in the state of Wyoming as a bunch of kindergartners in our local governments, because we refuse to provide the expertise and the technology and the abilities to be able to compete at that scale. And again, it's not necessarily the Forest Service is being driven by the courts. They make a decision, they're litigated, the courts overturn the decision of the Forest Service to do a timber sale. We've seen thousands of those across the Western United States. Where the heck was the state of Wyoming? And so maybe some of that litigation is going to be as interveners on behalf. And in fact, we have a number of times in my time in Wyoming where the state of Wyoming has intervened on behalf of the Forest Service on litigation. The one that comes to mind the most is the litigation on the Medbo. There was litigation by biodiversity to remove all domestic sheep grazing allotments off the Medicine Bow. The plan says, the forest plan says, we're going to follow Wyoming's lead on their domestic wild sheep management plan. That's what the forest plan says. The litigants sued. We joined with the Forest Service and we prevailed in that lawsuit. And so sometimes it's not suing the Forest Service, it's supporting the decisions in the federal court that support those amenities, the values that we have in Wyoming. So it's not necessarily always an adversarial relationship. We do have a partner there. What we need to understand is what we need to weigh in is we're not gonna, it's not the agency, it's the issue. And we need to take very strong positions on those issues. And sometimes we'll be with them and sometimes we'll be against them.
All right, with that, I think that will wrap up this subject. Thank you, Senator Hicks. And committee, now you have heard a lot of information. We had something similar when I first joined the Select Water Committee, and it's a bit like drinking out of a fire hose, pun intended. Sometimes, but you can see the amount of work that this committee has to do, and the importance of the issues facing us, and why we are convened here today as a joint committee, why we are having the CSG West conference here. And so with that, we will take a 5-minute break, and then we will be on to the U.S. Forest Service. Thank you. well as the Forest Service information. So it looks like everybody is kind of back. Welcome to Jackie Buchanan of the U.S. Forest Service and Chris Campbell, I'm assuming. So thank you for being with us today. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Ag and Select Water Committee. And go ahead.
Whoops, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Really, I'm going to take my glasses off when I look at you to see all of you. Can you
Pause for just one moment until we get your microphone fixed?
not touch it? Do
Okay,
not touch
don't
it.
touch it. All right.
It's really hard for me, but I will try to. And see, I didn't touch it. It went out, didn't it? I did not touch it.
Let's pause for just a minute because yesterday we had technical difficulties and I know that everyone wants to hear from you. We had parts of our presentations completely blacked out yesterday, so. All right, let's see if that one works.
Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm not going to touch it. We'll see how it goes. All right, Madam Chairman and members of the committee, thank you so much for having me here again today. I think I was with you maybe about 6 months ago for most of you. And as I say, every time I come to the great state of Wyoming, this is one of my favorite places in the world to be. And a lot of the folks in this room are some of my most favorite folks to spend time with. So thank you for giving me that. I'm here. I am Jackie Buchanan, Deputy Regional Forester for the Rocky Mountain region. I'm here representing Frank Bem, who's our Regional Forester for the Rocky Mountain region. And both he and Mary Farnsworth from the Region 4 from Ogden they are both in Washington, D.C. for a national meeting this week. So I'm lucky enough to be here with Chris Campbell, who is my counterpart, Deputy Regional Forester in the Intermountain region. And so you'll have both of us today. And yeah, I'd be remiss if I did not start out recognizing and thanking some folks like Kelly Norse, who already spent some time with you this morning. We are working very closely with the state of Wyoming in the forestry side. And Kelly already has proven to be a great follow-up to Bill Crapser. And so we really appreciate the relationship we have. I also want to recognize the other folks within the governor's staff, Kate Barlow, a great person to work with. Kate and I have a standing every once a month call just to catch up, but we end up talking quite a bit more. So just want to show some appreciation for those folks and how we work together. I also want to recognize our partners in regard to industry here in Wyoming. I've got Jim Magagna here, who is one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And so recognizing a critical partner with the livestock group here in Wyoming, and then the timber industry. You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about multiple use management on National Forest System lands, and the timber industry is a huge partner for us to be able to do that critical work. So we just recognize that, and I want to call it out and thank them for continuing to be with us on that journey. So today we're talking about, you all have asked us to talk about forest plan revision and water and how they're linked and the importance of them. And I mean, I took so many notes in the previous presentations around different points that each of you had brought up. Senator Hicks, I actually had half a page of the same talking points that you had, sir, in regard to water and where it comes from and the importance of the national forest lands for maintaining that. But before we get to the water part and the tie, I want to talk a little bit about forest plan revision and the importance of that. So when you talk about the challenges, and Senator Hicks had brought this out, of changes of administration can, even though we as agency employees are not political, the reality is administrations change and there are influences that come down. So when we talk about forest plan revision and the importance of it, I could not stress how critical that is in regard to, you're talking about what will oversee the management of a national forest for 10 to probably 20 years. So getting that forest plan revision accurate and right is probably one of the most important pieces of work you all can do in regard to wanting to see the things you talked about today, improvement on the waterfront, increased water and sustainable management, for all aspects of those national forest system lands. So forest plan revision is huge and your involvement is critical. Now, let's talk about the Forest Service and where we've been and where we are now. Quite frankly, we have pretty much, I hate to say this, but we kind of stunk at forest plan revision. We have, the intent was never to have a process that would take 7 to 8 to 10 years to get through a forest plan revision. But the reality is we've seen a lot of forest plan revisions start. And if they do end, it's 6, 7, 8 years. And quite frankly, some of them never got to an end, they just kind of stalled, whether through litigation, court cases that have come up. So the Forest Service about 2 years ago came to a decision that we had to do something different if we wanted a different outcome. And so in the past, if you were a forest supervisor, like I was on the Bridger Teton, and I was told to do a forest plan revision, it was up to me to develop a team, to lay out the work. And quite frankly, most of us, that's not our area of specialty. That's not our area of expertise. So a lot of times it wasn't done very well. So the agency made a decision to stand up national teams, plan revision teams, to take on this work with the sole focus of forest plan revision. So those teams have now been established, and we are actually hosting what we call the Intermountain Planning Service Organization. Now, the wonderful thing for Wyoming is this team will cover all of the Intermountain West or Intermountain regions plans. It will cover the Rocky Mountain region plans. So all of Wyoming will fall under this team. So when you're having a forest plan revision done on the Bridger Teton and a forest plan revision done on the Medicine Bow, you will have the same team doing it. So your chances of having a consistent approach, your chances of being able to work through that consistently and in a way that I think Wyoming will have a better chance of getting to an outcome that you all are looking for. I think you're going to be set up for that with this new approach. So Jenna Sloan, who was actually our regional planning director, has taken over this team. My boss, Frank Bem, is the overseer as far as the regional forester for the 4 regions are concerned, because she'll also cover Missoula and the Albuquerque, New Mexico, Arizona. But as a part of my responsibility, she works directly for me day in and day out. So hopefully that gives some of you some comfort because I'll be a part of the planning effort. Now we represent like Chris and Mary, we represent what they want to achieve out of the Intermountain region. But I think we're just going to be in a position to get a much better product and to be able to get through the process in a time frame that will really make a difference. As I said in the past, we've been averaging probably 6 to 7 years to get through a forest plan revision. The chief wanted us to actually go to a 2-year process. But now realistically, we're shooting for no more than 4 years. So between a 3 and 4 year process. And some of that you simply can't avoid, because to be able to have the engagement of the county commissioners, to be able to have the engagement of the state agencies and the public process, you've got to give enough time. And there's some regulatory time periods in there as you go through the forest plan revision process. But I'm telling you, 3 to 4 years is much better than probably what we have seen in the past. So it's exciting. Now, when you talk about involvement, cooperating agency status, and I think maybe Senator Hicks spoke to this earlier, I would encourage at the county level and at the state agency level that you all seek that. I mean, it's a really good way to be included. It's a good way to have a seat at the table. There are other options and this is, depending on if it's at a county level or an agency level. And I think Senator Hicks called this out, but even when I was on the Bridger Teton, Joel Bausman, a good friend of mine, I actually had the county commissioners sit on the planning for those of you here in Wyoming, probably remember the 44-7 project that took place here close to Pinedale. And they actually were on the NEPA team. The county commissioners had a seat at the table as a part of that planning effort. And so there's all kinds of options depending on what the capability is and what the desires are. But I would encourage you to seek that out. Because again, when you talk about the forest plan revision on the Bridger Teton and on the Medicine Bow and then the Black Hills, it is critical that you help us get to the right place. So it's an exciting opportunity. This is the kickoff. The team is taking over. They'll be at the start with the Bridger Teton. They'll be at the start with the Medbow. And even though we had started the Black Hills and had tried to set up a team, we made the decision about 2 months ago to have that team also take over the Black Hills, again, for a more consistent professional approach that we feel will get us a better outcome. So that's very exciting. I hope all of you will be with us on that journey for those 3 forests, and hopefully we'll end up in a better place than where we've been before. Okay. So then, and I've totally blown out my notes as I normally do with you all. So as you notice, I started with one page and did not.
Perfect. I think we have a question for
Oh,
you.
yes, ma'am.
All right, Senator Hicks.
So Jackie, a question when it comes, so when we did the lab EIS on the Medbow, the Forest Service used their HEFRA authorities, which allowed them to select cooperating agencies. And then it was a very interesting process, to actually sit through some of the appeals discussion with some of the
With me.
appellants and stuff.
I think.
So are those opportunities also available through the forest planning process as they were in that? Wasn't a forest plan. It was a very large environmental impact statement. And under those authorities, it allowed the Forest Service to go out and say, yeah, we're going to have the state of Wyoming, the county commissioners, but it also afforded greater participation at the appeals level by those cooperating agencies. Is the current process with the planning process similar, or can that be incorporated in?
It is all available, Senator Hicks. And I was in that objection for the lava process. I remember very clearly seeing you participate in that. And so all of those are still on the table with the 2012 planning rule. It really is focused on being inclusive with our partners, the states, the counties, especially. So all of that is still on the table. And again, the strength that comes from having the cooperators and partners at the state and county level, you can't come up with a value to that. I mean, it's really important.
So one follow-up, Madam Chairman. So if those are available, it's going to be a line officer. Somebody's got to make that decision. And because they're forest plans, is that going to be the forest supervisor, or is there going to be this planning group? Or is that going to have to go back to the regional forester to make a determination of what level of participation the cooperating agencies are going to get? Is it the actual team here, or is it still going to fall back to the forest supervisor?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Men, thank you. So the local decision maker is still ideally supposed to be the forest supervisor. And that local connection with those district rangers, with that forest supervisor, is hugely important. The team takes our direction, takes Chris's direction, my direction, the regional foresters working with those forest supervisors, but they are there to do the work, not to be decision makers in any form or fashion. And, I'm very comfortable saying, we engage with direct conversations with the forest soups on, how the direction should go, the involvement. And if we thought there was an issue, we would engage. I guarantee the regional foresters and the deputy regional foresters would engage at the local level to work things out. But, we're all committed to working together. And I think we all recognize the importance of having those partners at the table.
process for appeal if there's a decision by a forest supervisor not to afford cooperating agencies? Or is it just, well, we come visit and we try to work something? Is there a formal process for that appeals by that line officer?
You know, I don't think there's a formal process, but I'm working through this with the Black Hills right now because we've had a lot of turnover in leadership on the Black Hills. So let's talk openly a little bit about that. Got into some issues from county commissioners feeling like they were not offered the opportunity to sit at the table. Randy Dybert and I have had a call every week for the last 3 weeks. And I've engaged, to work through that with them. Came up to our attention. And so not a formal process, but I think a pretty clear understanding of, how to appeal to the next level. And Forest Soups work for regional foresters. And so it didn't take us very long to engage. Okay.
Any further questions before we go on? All right, go. Oh, one more. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Figure out this microphone out. Try not to touch it. I guess I'm very apprehensive on this word cooperating agencies and, negotiations and, my understanding about being negotiating means that it's a give and take. And I haven't heard of you guys giving up much of anything when it comes to your position. It seems like we're losing by half all the time. So you take, and before you know it, you've got a large position on your point of view. So now when it comes to this, to do forest management or not to do forest management and how it may or may not impact its unsettled law as it's stated here in your statement. Obviously, I've heard something that's disagrees with that. I'm confused because we come with a statement that we're partners, and yet a partner to me has an equal position in an outcome. And I do not see that happening. Maybe not so much with, I try to separate you from the federal government. I guess your boss is higher up, but they've got a certain opinion. You get your marching orders and you do what you do because they tell you to do it. I'm assuming that is what happens. But when it comes to this, if we have a position that we want to do more forest management, and you folks are just going to go, no, we're going to continue to do what we want to do. As a matter of fact, we want to do more of it. So I want to know, frankly, how do you explain that as being a partner? I'm baffled on why that means we're partners. I'd like to be a partner. I think that's the best way forward. I agree with you, but how can this work out more amenable to us when it comes to these outcomes? Is there some sort of policy change that we should look at, or maybe a different way of approaching this? Could you help me out with understanding this more deeply? Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So Senator Kolb, so I wish it was as simple as we had one partner. So part of the challenge is when you talk about sustained multiple use, and you asked, I think, Kelly earlier, what's her stand on that? Well, our agency was created on sustained multiple use. We were created for that purpose. But that means that we have to work with a variety of folks. So our states and our counties have a different saying because your government and government to government kind of relationships are different than John Q. Public or independent organization. I think the Nature Conservancy was brought up. They could be a partner too, but they are a partner at a different level. And so we offer a different level of engagement with our counties and our state governments, and you get access to information in a different way at a different level than those other partners do. But that doesn't mean we don't have to take input or listen, or that we shouldn't take input and listen. And so that's part of the struggle that we have, part of the challenge, part of the work that we have to do is to sort through all that. And it's interesting, we have the Black Hills in case we work with two states. Well, and even when we talk about the headwaters of the Colorado, we're talking about Colorado and Wyoming. Sometimes we're dealing with government to government that's very different even at that state level. Now the Black Hills, Wyoming and South Dakota are fairly similar in ideological approach and kind of core issues. But you talk about sometimes Wyoming and Colorado, we can have some differences there. So the challenge is we do offer you a different seat at the table than the public gets. We offer you a different seat at the table and level of engagement than we would another organization like the Nature Conservancy. But we might have multiple people at that level. And again, you can have, okay, we're in Wyoming. You have one county in particular that's a little different than maybe a lot of the other counties in the state of Wyoming. I won't call it out, but politically there's some differences. But I'm trying to walk that line, if you follow where I'm going, but so we still have to work with all the counties equally though, right? And so that's part of the challenge. So I just offer that to you. And one of the reasons why I brought up being a part of the ID team, that gets you to an even different level when you're on the ID team, interdisciplinary team, and you have a seat there. So the commitment is high. I can only tell you that when I talk to my boss and when I talk to his boss, the chief, the commitment is very high to have you be a partner, but you just have to recognize sometimes there's multiple partners coming at this that we have to give consideration to. So sometimes we find a compromise.
Follow up, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand there's multiple people with different opinions. The issue is that frankly, the legislative body represents the entire state of Wyoming and is elected by those people. These individual groups that I won't call them out by names, but just say they got a particular interest. They represent could be anybody in Europe for all I know. And I think that's the difference. So I do appreciate you saying there is a difference between different levels of government and people and organizations. But I just really think that I don't want to be driven by somebody driven by the EU, and I'm not a conspiracy guy. I want to be driven by the people in the state of Wyoming that have a larger voice than say some people living in Virginia or even amongst their own state, but they're stifled by the vast majority of people in the state that have a very specific opinion about what to do about these choices. And I just want to make sure the playing field is level and equitable to the people that you're trying to, take their consideration in making a decision. And I hope that we drive towards that and that you do your best to try to, balance that. I know it's not easy, but I would like to hear, and I do hear positive things about what you're trying to do as opposed to BLM. I think it sounds a lot better to me from what you've explained, but I just think we have to continue to work on this and we have to do a better job. And because I don't want to end up in litigation, but partners from what I'm hearing, it means litigation partners, adversarial. And I don't want that, but I hope that you can develop a better plan or maybe have more explanation about why you've come up with the position you've taken. Thanks.
Wouldn't you agree?
I'll just shake my head.
Yes,
Madam
that sounds good. Well, we have another question for you down on the other end. Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So it's my understanding one of the first things you do in this planning process in the forest plan revision is define the existing condition. And so you got all your minions out there defining the existing condition. That is probably it is the most important thing you will do in this process. And so how do we as counties, as state of Wyoming, how do we as cooperating agencies, are we allowed to review that existing condition and then provide input on whether we believe you are representing the resource itself accurately?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was actually waiting that time and so jumping the gun. Yeah. Um, Representative Summers, yes, absolutely. And so talk about process a little bit, that what we are calling in this new parameter of planning, year zero, and Chris is going to cover a little bit more specifics about the BT, but the BT is going into year zero. The Black Hills is just finishing year zero. That's the assessment. So that's when you are looking at what are those conditions, what is currently on a snapshot in time, not a hard and fast delineation, but it's a snapshot in time of what are the current conditions on that forest. So the assessment period is extremely critical, and your involvement at the county level and at the state level is really important in the review of that. On the Black Hills, with the cooperating agency status that we have with the counties, we gave those counties 30 days ahead of anyone else seeing those assessments to take a look at them and then give us feedback. I tell you, the process was a little wonky at the forest level, which is why we've pulled that forest plan process now back into this national team to take care of it, because it didn't go the way it probably should. But when you are looking at, and the Medbo is going into year zero this year too. So this is assessment year. Again, very critical that you weigh in on that. And as a part of being in that process at a government to government level, that you participate with us as those assessments are carried out. And then you look from what's the current condition to what your desired conditions are. So when you talk about what you want to see out on that landscape in regard to water, to vegetation management, to grazing, all of that, that's where you start to then say, here's where we want to be from where we are today. So absolutely.
All right, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so we know that local governments have cooperating agency status. We know that the governor has the review process. The legislature doesn't have either one of those available to us. So what role do you see us playing? And how do we become a part of this process other than public comment?
If I may respond, yes.
Please do.
That's a great question. And I don't think I've ever been asked that before. When I think about like this committee and the fact that we engage fairly regularly with this committee in particular, I can't help but think that there is a way, and I would tie it back still to probably the governor's authority and our commitment to recognize Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, as one of those government to government bodies. But I'm probably going to have to do a little thinking about that. But I would love to be able to come back. I'll talk to the team, Jenna, and I'll probably talk to the Washington office, but see if we can riddle that out a little bit and come back to what options we may have.
It'd be great, because the reason this question has come to me is from being involved in the Newcastle RMP with the BLM. And it didn't seem that we had a real role to play. The commissioners had available information that wasn't available to us, and the governor did, but the legislature is not privy to any of that, and in fact excluded from that. So it's something to think about, and something that I think we might need to look into as we go forward.
Okay. I will check into that and we'll get a response back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So go ahead and continue on, and we'll see where we go from here.
I just flipped over 5 pages, so let me see how many I can get through before flipping another one. So Senator Hicks had brought up the lava project. Interesting, we actually have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, Wednesday, that the forest is going to host. One of the things that comes out of that we really, I think, have learned a lot from are our commitments around accountability. And in the past, through some planning processes, we committed to things we didn't always follow through on. So that lava project, which covers about 288,000 acres, Senator Hicks, I think, and set up to do 15 years of work. One of the things that's built in is an annual meeting that goes over what have we done, you know, in our accountability, whether it's removing roads, moving through areas, doing the monitoring that we said we were going to do. So that's actually taking place tomorrow. So I just wanted to call that out. And then when you talk about water and options for reservoirs and conserving water, Jason, I think from the Wyoming Lands Group is here. And one of the big pieces of work that we've got going on is the West Fork Battle Creek Reservoir and the possibility of a land exchange to add additional capacity here in Wyoming for water reserves. And so we're proceeding with that. I think everyone's working together. It's NRCS is actually the lead on that. We, the Forest Service, even though we're going to be giving up some land, we're a cooperating agency. So I feel your pain a little bit when you talk about, Senator Kolb, the cooperating agency piece, because that's the role we're in with that project. So, you know, I think it's the right role for how that project is moving forward, but we are doing everything we can to support it, and we'll see where we end up on that. But I think that is a positive option.
Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And this is an issue I don't want to go into length on, but I want you to know that there are really concerns about it, particularly from my district. And that is what basically has become a new charge or a lost charge on reservoirs to irrigation districts. Even though some of these lakes and these irrigation districts have been in existence since before the Forest Service, now because they forgot somebody didn't get a filing done under the Ditch Act, now they're having to pay at times and substantially more, not times more, 3 times more, 4 times more amount of permit to the federal government for a project that's been on the ground for 100 years. And so somehow, you know, I hope you guys are going to crack that nut and figure out a way that we don't break these little water districts because they simply can't afford to pass that through. So as you talk about reservoirs, would you please mention what you're doing about that? Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. So fair point. I think from a Forest Service perspective, we didn't put this forward. We're responding to a request from multiple entities, the state being one of them, on consideration. But I think that's the value of having a process that is open to the public, and that means all the folks who could be impacted. And that's, you know, we just have to go through that process. But I hear you loud and clear. You know, but this is something, when the request came in, we said we would go through the process. No predetermined outcome for us. And with the land exchange, you know, there's always, when you talk about give and take, there's quite a bit of give and take as we're looking at this project. And I say we're trying to be respectful on the requests that we received and see where we end up at. But that's hopefully for the determination of the good folks in Wyoming joining in and helping us figure out what is the right thing to do there. Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And it's my inability to articulate this issue. This isn't revolving around West Fork.
Okay.
So this is a charge you all have when you create a reservoir that's a dam. The amount of land that is taken out because of that reservoir then becomes a charge as a yearly permit.
Mm-hmm.
There have been reservoirs that have been in place for 100 years that have paid a certain fee, and now all of a sudden they're about to have to pay a huge other fee. And then even any expansion, even if it's downward in the New Fork Dam example, they're going to have to pay a lot more fee for that to the Forest Service for their permit for that reservoir on your land. And so I'm really concerned about that issue and whether, the Ditch Act was an old act that basically allowed previous users to be grandfathered into the system of this permitting. If you didn't sign up under when that Ditch Act came up, then you were subject to different rules, different laws, different fees. And I guess the thing I want to bring forward is these yearly fees in of themselves, even on a new dam, could cause a ditch company to not be able to provide water, to not be able to utilize the resource. So I hope you are looking at that broader issue, and all you have to do is say, yeah, I'll look into it, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think it's been a big issue here, and I really worry about any expansion of reservoirs or new reservoirs on Forest Service land, whether the irrigator, even if the state builds it, are the irrigators going to be able to pay the land fee of the federal government? So I hope you're doing something to help the advancement of providing more storage rather than an impediment to storage.
Well, and if you have to get back to us on that as well as the other question, we certainly understand, unless you want to phone a friend.
I was going to say, I think, well, and actually, Madam Chair, if I may, I think some question along those lines came up last time when Deb was here, Okenson, my counterpart from Region 4. We had a little bit of question, and this is much more in Chris's wheelhouse than mine. So I don't know if you want to talk to it now, or maybe when you get into yours.
Yeah, it would be great if you could answer. I appreciate you guys, because you always allow us to ask the questions we want to have answered. And I know that when I'm speaking to groups, I find that most helpful as well, because ultimately we're exchanging information and you don't know which information we need to have. So I appreciate it being a discussion and a debate more than just you reading from a page. So we really appreciate that. So if you could answer that question, we'd appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I don't think I have a great answer, but it is something that's being worked nationally. So this is a huge issue, not just for the state of Wyoming, but across the country. And so it's my understanding that we are not currently enforcing those fees yet. But I understand that doesn't calm your nerves when you see the bill come and you know that it's hanging out there. And so again, it is something that we're working. I think that we are engaged, nationally on this. I don't have an understanding of a timeline when we'll get resolution, but just want to add that it is on our radar and it is a big deal. And we do understand the impacts that this would cause to those local water districts and to the folks of Wyoming.
On ahead, that'd be great.
Okay, I am almost done.
All right.
So Kelly called out earlier shared stewardship and our renewed commitment to that. And so it's a great example of the two regions. We have one commitment with the state of Wyoming that we are working together. And I think we've talked about the additional things we want to undertake, how we increase our work together. And so I feel really positive about that. And I think that's going to continue. We're working on a new meeting schedule. So that's just us being able to share money, share resources, share work. And Kelly I want to call out Kelly and her staff, because they've also helped us on the Black Hills. We're doing that LIDAR work, and the state of Wyoming has pitched in to help us do some of that field level validation, which is extremely critical. And that is part of that working together and focusing on things that we all feel are the important pieces. And so just want to recognize the state of Wyoming for that. And then before I conclude, the headwaters of the Colorado, which Senator Hicks had touched on in his presentation, this is a commitment to do work in a critical landscape that goes between Wyoming and Colorado. It's got a lot of commitment behind it. It's got a lot of folks that are really impassioned about it. And, you know, one of the things I wanted to share is that we did just move $200,000 into the Wyoming side. I think it's going to be focused on Wyoming work right now to get that kicked off. And that was that just actually happened, I think a week ago. But we found some money to transfer into that to get that work going. So there's a lot of positive things happening, and there's a lot of things that have been long standing and agreements to work on, and then new things coming up like the headwaters of the Colorado. Although it's not really new, it's been in thought for a long time, but the actual formation of a collaborative and a group to do that cross boundary work is taking foot right now. So super excited about that. So I will close and let Chris have his share of the time, but just want to say thank you. Thank you for being the great state that you show up as for Wyoming. It's good to see all of you, and you know, we're not perfect, but I would say the commitment to try to be better. And Kelly said this. I was giving her a little bit of, she's like, you know, how'd it go? And I said, well, you know, that thing about we have to keep working to be better. You could have just said we're great and everything's wonderful, but the reality is we have to keep working to be better, and we want to be better. And so give us a chance. You know, we were talking Jim Magagna a little bit ago, and one of the challenges is we do have a lot of turnover in the Forest Service. But I have actually been working in Wyoming this last round for almost 14 years now. And so there are folks, and Russ Bacon on the Medicine Bow is an extremely committed forest supervisor, and we're going to get the right folks in the Black Hills too. But just know that our commitment is high, and we'll continue to do what we can to meet the expectations of the folks here in Wyoming. And thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Go ahead and give us your name and title, and I'll go on with your presentation.
All right.
And I'm sure we'll interrupt you with questions.
That's okay.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. As Jackie mentioned, I'm Chris Campbell. I'm the new Deputy Regional Forester for the Intermountain region of the Forest Service. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to come before the Joint Committee today. And I also want to thank State Forester Kelly Norris for inviting us to be here today. It's really a pleasure to be with you. As some of you may know, in Wyoming, the Intermountain region administers 4 national forests located in the western part of Wyoming, covering over 3.8 million acres. That includes the Ashley National Forest, Bridger Teton, Caribou Targhee, and the Uinta Wasatch Cache National Forest. We manage these forests for multiple uses, ranging from forest health, water, wildlife management, protecting cultural and heritage resources, livestock grazing, extracting minerals, outdoor recreation, and timber production. In Wyoming, we administer 418 grazing permits, 4 ski area permits, and 235 outfitter and guide operations. The estimated annual visitation to our western Wyoming forests is over 2.2 million people annually. And the vast majority of those visiting the Bridger Teton and the Ashley National Forest Flaming Gorge Ranger District. I know forest plan revision is a subject of interest here. And so just to go over some of the status of those processes on some of our forests. So several national forests in Wyoming are working on or preparing to initiate their 15-year forest plan revision processes. In many instances, litigation and unforeseen leadership changes have extended this timeline to 20 years and beyond. The Ashley National Forest is nearly complete with its forest plan revision process. As we mentioned earlier, the Bridger Teton National Forest is in the process of revising their forest plan in those initial stages. Specifically with the Ashley Forest Plan revision, it was initiated about a year ago, and it's currently near completion. We recently held a well-attended objection resolution meeting just a few weeks ago on Monday, August 28th, which included attendance by many cooperating agencies, including Sweetwater County and the CLG. The meeting provided the reviewing officer, my counterpart in our regional office, Deb Okeson, who I think has spoken to this committee before, provided her with an opportunity to discuss and gain additional insight into the objections from the objectors and other interested persons. Our goal is to have the formal response letter sent to objectors by September 18th. This letter will include instructions that Ashley Forest Supervisor Sue Eichhoff must implement prior to making a final decision. The Forest Supervisor's goal is to sign a record of decision for the revised plan later this year. Specifically regarding the Flaming Gorge Management Plan, which is related to but not part of the Ashley Forest Plan revision. The plan, this next effort will replace the 1986 plan and will be written in compliance with the 2012 planning rule and coordinated with the new revised forest plan. The draft Flaming Gorge National Recreation Management Plan was released for scoping comments about a year ago in December of 2022. And the forest received 16 submissions with comments relating to multiple issues. The forest has held 2 alternative development workshops with stakeholders and the public earlier this year, in June in Rock Springs, Wyoming, and June 15th in Dutch John, Utah. The purpose of these meetings was to review the scoping comments and identify any potential alternatives to include in the Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area Management Plan for analysis and the environmental assessment. Based on stakeholder input on the initial proposal, a draft plan is being finalized and an environmental assessment will be prepared here shortly. The updated draft plan will be posted to the forest website when it's finalized. The plan will address new forms of recreation that have emerged and others that have fully developed since the 1986 plan was completed. Recreation uses such as all-terrain vehicle, utility vehicle use, bouldering, paddleboarding, biking, e-biking, and other activities that appeal to a variety of user groups. The forest supervisor will weigh forthcoming public comment and responses when modifying and identifying a preferred alternative for the revised forest plan, which will be released with the final EIS later this year. Now on to the Bridger Teton Forest Plan revision. As many of you know, it's been over 20 years since the Bridger Teton had a forest plan revision completed. There have been several leadership changes in the interim years. But the Bridger Teton National Forest is currently working on alignment with various cooperating agencies and partners as they begin to initiate the forest plan revision process here next year. The current forest plan for the BT was completed and approved all the way back in 1990. The Bridger Teton's Forest Land and Resource Management Plan was approved in 2002 and has been amended numerous times since then. A plan revision is necessary to ensure management direction is responsive to increased recreation, diversification of the local economy, while maintaining traditional uses of public lands. The Forest Land Management Plan is a strategic document that will guide the forest management decisions for the next 15 years and beyond. Interest in the forest plan revision is very high, as we've already heard this morning, and among a number of cooperators and groups and the public, and especially among our grazing permittees. The goal of the forest supervisor is to submit the draft assessment to the Federal Register for public comment in early 2024 to formally begin the forest planning process. The Bridger Teton team is currently working on the assessment of current conditions before they start the actual forest plan revision process. The assessment of current conditions is not a decision document, but as we've discussed, is that the critical first step to start the forest planning process. The forest supervisor, Chad Hudson, has had preliminary meetings with Teton, Lincoln, Sublette County commissioners, Kate Barlow from the governor's office, and applicable state agency leadership to review the overall process and confirm we will be working with them as cooperating agencies. The Bridger Teton National Forest has worked closely with our regional program staff on its assessment, taking best practices and lessons learned from other recent forest plan revisions. The Bridger Teton is meeting various subject matter experts for the 15 assessments. Then they will meet with its core group and external stakeholders. The BT is preparing for stakeholder outreach, directing its district rangers to start engaging with their respective county commissioners and other local cooperating entities. As the forest finalizes its collaboration and engagement plan, it will start the formal outreach process soon. The Forest Service is aware that having multiple forest plan revisions ongoing at the same time can put, and likely is putting, competing demands on our cooperators' limited ability to participate fully. The Intermountain region, the region that I'm from, is also attuned to the growing appetite for faster resolution to the forest plans as well. Additionally, as you may recall, the Caribou-Targhee National Forest recently completed its draft EIS for the Crow Creek Pipeline, which is enabling the much needed energy project to move forward. The next major lift by the forest that has an important Wyoming nexus is the Grand Targhee Resort EIS. We expect the draft EIS to be available before the end of the year. We do not have an identified date yet, though, for that. We have been working throughout the Forest Service, our regional office, and nationally at our Washington office with cooperating agencies and others to schedule the briefings and with the Shoshone-Bannock tribes for consultation. Now on to forest management impacts on water yield, just to say a few things. As noted earlier by Jackie, water really is the lifeblood of our forests and of our communities. It's essential to achieving our top priority in maintaining forest health and sustainability. Regarding the impact of our Flaming Gorge management plan on water yield, there's really not a lot of water that flows from that area into Wyoming. So there's really a de minimis impact on the state's water yield there. Also on the much larger Bridger Teton National Forest, as already has been mentioned this morning, I think it could be a larger discussion, and there likely will be a lot more engagement around water yield and what that means in the planning process. Specifically on shared stewardship, like Jackie mentioned, it has been really great working with Kate Barlow from the governor's office, State Forester Kelly Norris. And I'm really excited about where we go from here and revitalizing that plan and updating some of our shared priorities. And I think of interest to this committee, one of the big things that we're adding is headwaters and watershed management as one of our 6 priority areas that we're going to be working on together. Just for additional context, the other priorities that we're working on in addition to the headwaters and watershed management is invasive species management, timber and fuels management, rangeland improvement, wildlife habitat improvement, and recreation management. Understanding that priorities may change from year to year and with turnover in leadership and the like, flexibility is going to be critical in our ongoing collaborative effort. We look forward to working more closely with the state of Wyoming and achieving our shared goals. So this concludes my prepared remarks. I just want to thank again you all for the opportunity to talk with you today. And I look forward to continuing and strengthening our working relationship with the state of Wyoming. So I think that's it for me. I'll welcome any questions.
All right, thank you. I think we have one, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Circle back around to the Sweetwater County Buckboard discussion you've had with the Board of County Commissioners. As I guess an open-ended question is, what happened because of those comments? Did you change anything because of the comments that they had given you? Or is it kind of, I don't know how that actually worked with your policy or your procedures, but you could get in that particular situation. Could you please explain the outcome of the comments from the board and how maybe they did or didn't impact what you've done or were deciding to do? Thank you, Madam Chair.
So Madam Chair and Senator, I'd have to apologize. I don't know the specifics since I wasn't there and my counterpart, another deputy regional forester, was involved with that. I do know that they take those comments very seriously, and there's a rigorous process that we go through in responding to them. I think what I would have to do is to circle back with Deb Okeson, the other deputy regional forester, to maybe get some specific feedback on or a specific understanding of how that conversation went and if anything was changed. I'd be happy to get that for you.
See him up there. Okay, and could you please send us the information you find on that? That would be very helpful for us because I know there is a lot of questions surrounding how much impact does all the work, because county commissioners do a lot of work in these RMPs, and how much weight does it actually hold in the long run? That would be very helpful for all of our communities. I think Senator Guru might have had a hand up online for a while that I missed. Is that the case, or how did we misunderstand that? Is he there? All right, go ahead, Senator.
I'm here, Madam Chairman. I thank you. And actually, you're right on time. It's no problem. It's a question for both, actually. We've heard a lot today, a lot of, there's frustration. I know my friend Senator Kolb has articulated it quite well in this partnership and how we work together. And I also like to put in a pitch for our chairman who said that maybe our committee should have a cooperating agency status. I would say, since we're the ones that provide funding, you might want to take note of that because, that always helps when it comes time to implement any of these plans. But my question is, to try to help alleviate all this, is and just an opinion from you all. I heard you say that we're at just finishing year 0 on the BT. We're starting the process in Black Hills. We're starting the process in Medbo, year 0. Is this, in your opinion, could we be falling short because we're not coming in as prepared or ready to state our preferred outcomes in the beginning and from a philosophical point of view? Would that be more productive from your end, hearing from us, that if we kind of did more work on the front end? Because sometimes I feel like we're reacting, and then when we're reacting, sometimes we feel that the decision's already been made, and now we're just kind of following along. Does that make any sense? I mean, I wonder sometimes, should we be more upfront about our goals and desires for each of these issues, whether it be recreation or timber harvesting or. That's my question.
And
Right. So Madam Chair, if I maybe could go first, and we'll see if Jackie needs to clean up after me here. But I think, to me, that's the promise of the shared stewardship agreement with the state, and really coming to agreement on those 6 shared priorities, which forest plan is a huge part of where those priorities can be manifest. But it's not just in forest planning. I mean, we're doing work on the ground every day, every year, and we're doing more work together than we probably have ever before. And those priorities guide that work that we do, and bringing different resources at our disposal to get some of this work done. And so I think I just would put a plug in there for our shared stewardship agreement and our shared stewardship work, that it's a continuous thing, just getting stuff done on the ground. Specific to the Bridger Teton, my understanding is, I mean, right now is the time to be thinking about this, to be talking about this, and to start to get engaged. And I think at the state of Wyoming level, starting to get organized around, what are your priorities, and how do you engage with us in the process? And so I don't know statewide if there's.
do you have some further comment?
If I may, ma'am.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, Chris is spot on. The shared stewardship is a great way for us to take a step back and look at, that big picture. But I would say that being very involved with the forest plan at each forest, I can't stress again enough the importance of your engagement early and often, and in a robust way. But I think having that state idea, which Wyoming, I think you all have some pretty clear thinking of what you want to see from the state, from these public lands in the state. So I think kind of formulating that, collating around that will help you when you step into the Bridger Teton, the Black Hills, and the Medbo route. I think, doing some pre-work now and going in with kind of that idea that you want to center around what's important, what are those values, will be extremely helpful.
All right. Any follow-up, Senator?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I think Senator Ide was next. He's had his hand up for a little while.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, folks, for being here. So I know our governor, the governor of South Dakota, our congresswoman recently testified regarding the new rule making on multiple use. I think it's a question for you and probably the BLM as well on, all of this movement towards landscape health and conservation. And they're looking for, a single use effectively for conservation that would take, a lot of Wyoming's means of production, whether it's logging, oil and gas, grazing, recreation, completely off of the map. It looks like at the upper echelons of the organization, the Department of Interior, like I alluded to in Senator Hicks's presentation, it looks like it's going the wrong direction. And we're nervous about it here. That's our livelihood. That's our, those are all our industries. And, these conservation, this new rule, and I'd like for you to comment on it, and you can probably enlighten this body here a little bit about that. The way I understand it, I mean, anybody could, if they pass this rule, make a conservation easement on this. It could be somebody from China that puts it on there and takes away our industries here. Would you or could you comment on that and what you're sort of our local line of defense on how we deal with that? Thank you.
All right,
Chris is like,
go
no, you
right
go.
ahead.
I'm like, no, you go, Madam Chair.
The microphone's a hot potato now.
No. If I may. Yeah, so I'm not, I did not have an opportunity to listen to their testimony or how they spoke to that. I would say I've had no indication from our chief or from our regional foresters that we're heading in any different direction than sustained multiple use. And I think, even as we talk about grazing, as we talk about timber, our chief has really called out the recognition and the importance of doing what we can to sustain our industry that we have today. So I have not gotten any indication that our agency is shifting anything based on, what people are putting forward on that. And quite frankly, it would take an extreme level of effort, at the Washington level, at the congressional level to change that. Policy wise, I'm getting no indication that we're going to do anything that would change where we have been in regard to all those uses: recreation, timber harvest, grazing, obviously the water as a whole. I think all of those are continuing to be, the focus for where we want to center around. I've heard nothing. I mean, I don't know if you have, Chris.
Madam Chair, that's a slick way to pass the microphone back over here. Yeah. And I would just add that I haven't heard anything either. I think we're on I think everyone understands the importance of multiple use and actively managing our forests. And for us, I think the big party right now is around the wildfire crisis that we're facing across the West. And so that's obviously a big focus for us in our day-to-day work. But multiple use is what we're looking for.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just for my own understanding, my own benefit, how many acres of land are currently under U.S. Forest Service in Wyoming?
So, Madam Chair, I think I can add them together. I think I was 3.8 million
Acres
for Region 4. For the 4 forests, so that's the Ashley, the Bridger Teton is the big one, UWC, and the Umatilla Wasatch Cache and the Caribou Targhee.
That's total acres of U.S. Forest Service land in
In
Wyoming.
the western portion of the state, or the Intermountain region.
Which is, let's see, it's under 2 million. And we have the Medbo and Thunder Basin. Thunder Basin's about 500,000 acres. The Medbo, just in Wyoming, not the Brown.
Yeah, why don't we have you? Yep.
Oh, Kelly.
Yeah, yep, phone a friend.
Here, my friend. Yeah. I was going to do quick math and see how good I got. But
Just from
I have this
everyone who
memorized.
you are and give us the answer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's 7 million for the Forest Service. And I just did this because I did a handout for the legislative tour on the Farm Bill in regards to the importance of the Farm Bill in GNA, because it affects 7 million on Forest Service. And I believe BLM has 500,000 of forested lands that we consider harvestable.
was that including Thunder Basin too?
Yes, because that research study is 9.2. Wyoming claims just about 10 million, but the private lands is intermingling. So it's right in that 2 million. Helpful, hopefully. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.
So Kelly gets a prize for that one, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kelly.
Did you have a question? All right, Senator Hicks.
Madam Chairman, and just kind of help to wrap this thing up, since how we're getting close, but a couple of observations and maybe some things that we would want to consider. My first observation, having been involved in a number of BLM and Forest Service planning efforts as a cooperating agency, the real work starts once the record of decision is work on the plan. If you just show up for the planning side of it and not the next 20 years of implementation, then you get what you show up and participate level. So it's just as equally important. And so when we talk about participation, our front line of participation is those local governments, as those county commissioners and those conservation districts. And so one of the things to make sure that we're adequately have the ability on all fronts, and particularly because the legislature does not have the ability to participate as a cooperating agency, which is something we should address. I think this committee should make a strong recommendation with support of the executive branch to fully fund the FNRPA account for federal land use planning, which those monies go directly back to either the use of the state or to those conservation districts and counties involved in these forest plans, BLM resource plans. And so I would make that recommendation, Madam Chairman, that this committee support a letter from you and the co-chair from both Select Water and Joint Ag to the joint appropriation in the governor's office to fully fund the FNRPA account and to make sure that we have adequate financing to participate at both the state and local level. Yeah, I just made that motion, man.
That is in the form of a motion. And I have that as a motion. Does staff have that recorded? And so it was moved by Hicks, seconded by Kolb. Is there any discussion on the motion? Representative Yin. Get him a microphone. He might take your microphone if you don't want it.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So my only question is, how much is it to normally fully fund that account?
So
For the appropriate.
Senator Hicks, do you remember that?
Madam
exact
Chairman,
amount?
we typically try to keep a minimum of $1 million balance in that account. So usually on a biennial basis, it's around $1 million. We have gone up when there was a significant level of federal land use planning, particularly in Southwest Wyoming with energy development. We have gone more than that in the past, but normal appropriation was around $1 million per biennium, but we have supplemented that given the level of federal land use planning. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, you good? All right. Any further discussion? This we will, go ahead, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to state for the record that I'd be happy to fund this at a much higher level if necessary, whatever that number is, to fight this and to represent our best interests. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. And just for the record, this will be a joint vote of the Select Water and the Ag Committee. I'm not sure how staff wants to record that, but I just wanted that on the record. And then the letter will come from both committees, so everyone is able to vote. So seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion has passed, so we will fund that account. And did you have further comments, Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, and I'd like to try to address one of Senator Kolb's questions to our federal partners here today, that really a lot of times what we see is they don't have the tools. And so, in other words, when these processes come up and these appeals come up, it's not within the agency's ability to address them because they lack the tools from the federal government to be able to do that. And so I'm very cognizant of the fact that having worked in this arena for well over 30 years now, sometimes the failure of to be able to effectuate good land management lies with the responsibility of Congress. If I can give you numerous examples that Congress could do, but has not enacted the ability to have larger categorical exclusions for fuels or treatments. And so the Forest Service is constrained to use a categorical exclusion from NEPA of 3,000 acres or something in that ballpark. And then the importance of that is that's the expedited version of NEPA. We also need significant reform of the judicial review process, and particularly in light of collaborative efforts in federal land use management. And so sometimes we like to kind of stiff arm our federal partners and say, look, you're not doing your job. Sometimes we need to support them and getting those tools so they can effectively help manage that in a true partnership fashion. And so it's as much of a shared responsibility in accomplishing that than it is just saying you're not doing your job, ladies and gentlemen, because maybe we need to have a little discussions with our congressional delegation. And I can tell you, you saw a number of those earlier that I presented where there was testimony. Senator Barrasso has championed this, I think Senator Hageman, but we need to send clear message to our delegation that we support these efforts. And periodically, I do believe the legislature should ask our congressional delegation to participate in some of these meetings moving forward.
All right. Is there any further question or comment? With that, we'll let you off the hot seat. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you answering all of our questions and look forward to the other information you'll get back to us on. All right. Thank you. With that, we will take public comment on both the presentation by Senator Hicks or the Forest Service presentation. So if there is any public comment, and you guys you're free to leave the dais. Come on forward if you have something to say or anything else that struck you from the morning. Welcome.
With the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association, and knowing it is 12 o'clock, I will be extremely brief. Just two items I want to make the committee aware of with regard to the Forest Service that I think it would be good for you to keep track of. At the national level, they've undertaken a new initiative that they refer to as the futuring process. And most of us understand very little about that. Perhaps it might be worthy of your asking the Forest Service to provide you with some background information on that. Second one to make you aware of is that they have been for several years now undertaking the process of revising their manuals and handbooks for livestock grazing. We're starting to see a little bit of that now. The more significant parts of it haven't been released yet, but that might be a second item for this committee in your engagement to be involved with. My final point would be more to the Forest Service. They explained to you the use of these formal planning teams for the forest plan revisions. We fully support that from a process perspective, that those will understand how the process works. But I think it's critically important that it be the local Forest Service personnel that have relationships with all the various users in the communities, that they're the ones who are the liaisons back to not only the cooperating agencies, but to all the communities of interest within the areas where the forest plans are being revised, and would just emphasize that to them as well as for something to you be aware of. With that, Madam Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Magagna?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Go ahead and come forward.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. Kent Conley, Lincoln County Commissioner. There used to be blanket MOUs for cooperating agency. They went away from, made this request to the representatives. You should take a look at that and how you do it. You absolutely should have a seat at the table. I'm a part of an arm of Wyoming state government. I answer to you. And so you should have the right to sit in the same meeting I do. By that same token, you should have the right to sit with the governor who has a blanket MOU. And so that's the process I believe you should pursue and how you get represented at the table. And I'm very strong on that. On Senator Hicks, excellent presentation. Loved it. You know why. But the bottom line to it is you will probably get a request for angle imagery. Forest Service is hitting this up, and this goes to Mr. Speaker's subject and his. That is a higher level of LiDAR. And what that means to us, we can go to 3 inches and read your name tag and tell you what kind of brush is on the ground and how we can develop a strategy when we write our responses to the Forest Service, and it gives us more credibility at the table. My county, that will be 750,000. So you can expect county commissioners to be asking you for money. Other than that, I don't have another comment. Any questions, Madam Chairman?
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
By the way,
Thank you very much.
loved your question.
Thank you.
On the blankets.
Thank you. All right, come on up. Please use the microphone and state your name.
Chairman Steinmetz, illustrious committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I just wanted to comment on Senator Hicks's presentation. It was really expanded my mind because I thought reservoirs were the storage place of our water. I'm an irrigator, and water, as this gentleman said back here, is the lifeblood of my farm and of our state and of our country and of the world. Only 1% is potable water on this earth. Potable water is water that you can drink. We have a lot of it in our state. So it's a very precious asset to us. And so what I'd like to urge you today is to send along with this letter that you're going to send to the governor, Senator Hicks's proposal and things that he presented this morning, so that they might understand as I do that the reservoir is our snowpack. I was ignorant. He opened up my mind. He usually doesn't ask the question, what's next? He usually tells you. And so to me, the next question is, let's send a letter, have Senator Hicks spearhead this with his presentation to our governor, to the state engineer, to water development, to Senator Barrasso, Senator Lummis, and to Representative Hageman. And I wish there was a way to put teeth into it, that if the federal government doesn't adhere to these things, that you could do something to them, but I haven't found a way yet. Thank you.
Right, and for the record, that was Rod Wagner. Any further, my dad, any further comments from the public? Comments from the public, seeing none, we will adjourn for lunch until 1:30. Thank you.